Due to copyright, I can't publish many audiobooks on YouTube. At our audiobook novel service, we offer access to over 300 full novels from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, Wuxia, and more, all in high-quality audio format. Each novel is available with a one-time payment only. No subscriptions, no monthly payment, and no ads. Payments via PayPal or Ko-fi. To browse the full list of available novels, message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out our full catalog on Discord. Chapter 761, Carnage. Northern landed gracefully, his steps silent as he casually approached the girl. Yet, despite his composed movements, the look on his face was grim, serious. Roma, noticing the change in his expression, frowned as he got closer. "What happened? You look like you've lost hope in the world." Northern lingered for a moment before responding. "Actually, that might have been a better choice." His voice was quiet, yet heavy. "Rather, it seems the world has already decided to abandon us." A rigid seriousness crossed his face. Roma's frown deepened. "What do you mean exactly? Speak clearly." Northern let out an exasperated sigh, his gaze dimming with something somber. "I think it's better if I show you." He extended his hand toward her. Roma hesitated, her eyes flicking between his outstretched hand and the bleakness in his face. She knew what this meant, knew what would happen if she accepted. Exactly what she had slapped herself for thinking about just moments ago. But she also felt the gravity of the moment, the dire weight of the air Northern carried. She took his hand. Without another word, he pulled her close, and in the next instant, they vanished into the sky. Northern held her tightly against him as they soared. For a fleeting moment his mind wandered. Had he ever been this close to someone before? Had he forgotten? No, I don't think so. If I had, I would have remembered. At least within the confines of this world. A few moments later, Northern descended toward the base of the mountain. A vast, snow-covered plain that led into a dense white forest, far thicker than the one where they had fought the centipede-like monsters. Roma's eyes widened as they neared the ground. She could already see it. A grotesque spectacle of carnage. Blood stained the pristine snow, splattered in chaotic sprays, forming tiny crimson rivers. Bodies lay scattered across the expanse, their lifeless eyes frozen in silent screams, snuffed out forever by the cruel fangs of death. The entire caravan had been slaughtered. The deep lacerations that marred their corpses spoke of a vulgar, methodical brutality. Roma staggered backward, her body trembling, then turned abruptly and emptied the contents of her stomach onto the ground. Northern, meanwhile, remained still. His cold gaze swept over the devastation. He had seen worse. Silently, he stepped forward, scanning each corpse for any sign of life. But there were none. Eventually, he reached the first cargo. The mounts had suffered the same fate as the mercenaries who once guided them. Brutally slain, their bodies split open by deep, merciless cuts. Their blood had long dried. From the looks of it, this had happened hours ago. Safety really is an illusion. Maybe if the caravan had stayed with him, their chances of survival would have been higher. Or maybe not. Despite his overwhelming strength, Northern couldn't shake the suffocating feeling of helplessness that coiled around him. He never burdened himself with the responsibility of protecting others. He wasn't foolish enough to think he could. But still, if the people around him couldn't even be lucky enough to survive, then what was all his power for? Was power alone enough to protect someone? Or was there something else? For the first time in a long while, Northern felt confused. Deeply confused. All this time, he had prioritized his pursuit of strength, to stand at the pinnacle of the world. And now, he was closer than ever, making strides in barely 2 years that others wouldn't achieve in a lifetime. He had come so far. So why did it feel like he was failing? Each step brought him closer to the power he sought, yet further away from something else. Something he didn't even know he was missing. Northern stopped, his gaze falling upon a familiar corpse. The woman who had jumped in front of him last night. Her voice had been vibrant, her beauty enchanting. Now all that was left of her was a pitiful, mangled husk. He exhaled tiredly and looked away. Even Jester was dead. His body lay a few meters ahead, a limb missing. Rivulets of dried blood trailed from the first cargo to where he had collapsed, a large, gaping hole torn through his back. Northern winced. What could have caused that? Before he could dwell on the question, Roma approached him. Her hands clenched at her sides, her body trembling. She lingered, struggling with something. Northern frowned slightly. What?
I'm sorry.
The words fell from her lips, quiet and broken. She lowered her head, shame contorting her face, her shoulders trembling, her voice quaking as she continued. I was stupid and short-sighted, saying something like no one would die. Her breath hitched. Arg! I was so short-sighted that I discussed myself. Northern regarded her with an indifferent expression. But there was something else, something strange buried in his gaze. An emotion he couldn't quite place. At least she's wise enough to realize when she was wrong. Roma inhaled sharply, steadied herself, and straightened. It's fine if you want to return to Variolania at this point, she said, her voice steadier now. I will find a way to get the cargo to the blockade. Northern frowned immediately. Okay. I was definitely not expecting that. Even after everything, she still intended to move forward? The mounts were dead. The caravan was gone. Moving the cargo alone was impossible. And yet, she was still going to try? Why? For Garion? That's such a stupid thing to do. Garion is dead. The only thing she should be worried about right now is her safety. Even Northern, with all his power, was beginning to reconsider his options. Not out of fear, but because of the festival. He had prepared so much for it. He didn't want to leave the execution of his plans to a clone. And the dangers that kept falling upon them, one after another, if they continued, it would be difficult to check in on his clones or excuse himself when necessary. Honestly, he was considering returning with her. He could simply tell the shopkeeper how much of a failure this mission had been. But this girl, even with everything lost, she refused to give up. Even when there was no way forward. Was this determination? Or just plain stupidity? Why is there fire in her eyes? Why does she look ready to die? All for what? Northern felt his mind racing with 1,000 thoughts as he stared at her in disbelief. Why did she seem stronger than him right now? How was that possible? He had never felt this way before. Never met someone who made him feel lacking. His teeth clenched. Silently, Northern glared at her from behind his mask. Chapter 762. Passion. All those questions boiled inside of him like an angry volcano. And yet, Northern could not bring himself to voice any of them. He was angry at the girl, no doubt. Angry at her irrationality, at her stupidity. But hadn't he always been angry with them? Angry with Raven. Angry with Terence. Angry with Helena. He had always been angry with all of them. Even though they had given him reason, even though they had incurred his wrath in one way or another, his grudge had lasted longer than it should. Was there something he lacked so desperately? She had said it once, hadn't she? What had she called it again? Ah! Passion. Raven had looked him in the eye and said, "You lack passion." He hadn't agreed with her. From that time he had gone on to achieve a lot. Or at least... Northern's mind suddenly blanked. He tried to think of his achievements. Yet strangely, nothing came to mind. Nothing that mattered. He had become a sage. The youngest in history. But then, he thought about what Annette had said about Raven. That demon spawn of a girl had gone from being a deadly criminal to becoming the leader of the Lewengard Empire's knights. How? Northern had always known that comparison killed one's achievements. It made them feel small, insignificant. But standing here, in this moment of reflection, what else could he do? It was always everyone else that was the problem. But was that really the case? Did he not need to start looking at things differently? Try a bit more? And if he did agree, then his proper reaction right now should not be anger, but rather sincere curiosity. Northern sighed, blinking as he suppressed himself. Then, He looked at the girl evenly and, without a word, reached up and removed his mask. Roma startled slightly, eyes widening. Ah! She froze mid-sentence, caught off guard. He was beautiful. A beauty that did not belong to this world. Pristine, jaded, untouchable. His eyes held something indescribable. Something that made her heart stammer against her ribs. Then, his hoarse voice cut into her thoughts. My name is Rian. I'm Roma. She looked away, scratching her cheek, still utterly confused. Northern simply averted his gaze, scanning the land around them. His expression darkened. There's not enough time to bury everyone, he said. Whatever killed them isn't far. Probably smells us already. If we want to get to the blockade, we need to move fast. He turned back to her. Do you know the way? Roma's expression stiffened, confusion instantly replaced with sharp focus. Well. She turned briskly, making her way toward a fallen body. Northern squinted, watching her carefully. He had decided to stay for one reason. I will see for myself, without being an asshole, just what it means to be passionate. To his surprise, Roma returned with a bloody map in her equally bloody hands. She offered a faint smile, raising it for visibility. I'm a very good map reader, so it shouldn't be difficult. Then, after a pause, she looked at him, her eyes carrying a slightly pained expression. You really don't need to do this, she said quietly. You don't need to feel responsible for me or anything like that. My decision to go to the blockade is personal. And reckless. Northern smiled. Roma's breath hitched. It was good to see him smiling. But why? Why the hell did she like seeing him smile? He's a sage. Oh, Eldek. Just what is my cut-ton brain expecting? Her thoughts shattered when his voice cut through them, demanding her full attention. Whatever it is that's leading you to the blockade, you seem passionate about it. So I want to know why. His gaze darkened slightly. I want to see if passion is something worth pursuing and living for. Roma tilted her head. What are you talking about? Of course it is. Her voice rang with such raw conviction that even she startled at the sound of it. Her heart pounded not from fear, but from sheer frustration. Frustration that someone like him, someone so impossibly strong, could even question something so obvious. If she had even an ounce of what he had, just an ounce. She clenched her fists, then shook her head, discarding the thought. Instead, she took a step forward. Her boots sank into the blood-stained snow. You think passion is something you need to see before you believe in it? Northern narrowed his eyes, silent. Roma exhaled sharply, shaking her head. It's not something you wait for, Rian. It's something you decide. Something you throw yourself into, even when it makes no sense. She scoffed. Well, I don't expect a sage to really understand that. Northern frowned slightly. Being judged on such a premise did not feel good. Roma glanced at the carnage surrounding them. I'm sure you think I'm stupid for still trying to reach the blockade? Northern's expression shifted slightly. He was glad she knew his stance on her stupidity. Her voice followed quickly. Maybe I am. She lifted her chin. Maybe I should turn back. Go home. Pretend none of this ever happened. She took another step forward. But if I do that, then what was all this for? Her voice carried weight. Her golden eyes gleamed with something burning. Something brilliant. Every sacrifice, every life taken, lights a flame in my heart. These people, if not for anything, for these people I have to get to that blockade. She exhaled, pressing a hand against her chest as if holding something fragile inside of her. I have reason. I have promise. And that is my strength. That is why, even though I am not a drifter, I feel something rising. Something burning in my veins. She took another step. Even though Garion knew he would die the moment he moved, his body moved nonetheless. Her voice lowered. Then softly, she asked, Haven't you been curious why? Northern said nothing. Roma's voice dipped, quiet and sharp. Because of reason. She lifted her gaze, golden irises glowing. I'm sure he had a reason. One guided by principles. So therefore, He couldn't just bring himself to sit still and hope you survived. Her hands clenched. Strength without something to fight for. It's empty. She pressed her hand more firmly against her chest. I'm going to the blockade because I have a reason. I don't care if it's reckless. I don't care if I die doing it. Her breath trembled. Because if I turn back now, I might as well already be dead. The words settled in the cold air. She inhaled deeply, gaze still burning. And that's why passion matters. She let her words settle between them like falling snow, watching him closely. So don't just follow me to observe, Rian. She turned away and said over her shoulders. If you're coming, then fight for something. Even if it's just to find out what that something is. Chapter 763 Moving Forward. Roma's words continued to sting in a discomforting way, helping Northern to realize he might have underestimated the journey of growth. Correction was very difficult to swallow when he stood far superior than the corrector. However, every word she spat made more sense than he could make excuses for. She was right. Or maybe she was right. And if she was right, would this be the last thing he needed? Would this make his life and goal meaningful even if he loses? Northern silently scoffed at the thought. He didn't think so, but trying was not going to break his bones at the very least. Could cost him a strain or two, but nothing he couldn't get over. The perspective Roma offered, he welcomed it. He was going to find this thing called passion in the endeavor forward. The girl was silent. She moved from corpse to corpse, closed her eyes and mumbled something beneath her lips. Northern couldn't hear even if he wanted to. Unfortunately, he had very weak ears. In the meantime, while she did that, he shifted his attention to the cargo and thought for a while what to do about them. They needed a few mounts for a successful march to the blockade. I have a few to spare. Closing his eyes, he submerged himself in a grave silence, focus sharpening the angles of his face. Then a couple seconds later, a giant whirlpool began to appear in the middle in front of the cargo, between Dead Jester and the first cargo. The landscape began to tremble, softly making Roma stop and turn to Northern with a slight frown. Seeing the rift, her frown drew out a widened eyes instead. A rift! Her shoulders trembled as an oppressive wind suddenly blew and assaulted her with chills, prompting her to throw her arms around herself. What is this? What is this eeriness about? Roma's lips pulsed in silence, her eyes breaking out in wordless wonders. Slowly, the creature began to drag itself out of the rift, first revealing its sinewy body, deep eyes glowing with a distinguished red light. The sheer size of the monster sent jolts of electricity traveling across Roma's body. It was as tall as the trees, in fact. Its simple and slow movements plowed down the trees closely standing around it. The creature had 6 legs, rippled with sculpted muscles. It had a brown, stony skin on its back, and all over its entire hunched body were metallic shackles worn lime bracelets, with chains extended out of certain strategic points. The beast of burden was like a 3-legged rhino. Each step it carried burdened the earth terribly with its massive weight. Its large and long tail ended with a spiked ball, smashing the trees and weakening them at their base with its subtle movement. Eventually it came to a stop a breath away from the young man that had commanded it to come forth. Northern shifted his gaze to Roma and said with an even voice, "If we are going to reach the blockade with any bit of advantage, we would need my pal here." Roma was frozen in her stare. She wanted to speak, but the words scattered in her mouth, which she opened and closed severally. Her mind toiled and struggled with so many questions that she couldn't put to words because of the sheer might of what she was seeing. Night Terror was not the only souvenir that Northern got from his first rift. The beast of burden had been an enslaved mount that naturally got absorbed into his soul along with the rift itself. Much later he discovered that the beast was actually a part of the rift, and even though it never left the embrace of the palace thrown afar the mountains. He never saw any need for the creature and sometimes was too skeptical to command it, worried if the creature would not get out of hand. That worry still persisted even now. Northern did not want any mishap that would cause him to kill the colossal monster, maybe because of his attachment to it. It's just sentiments. There's no attachment of any sort. He looked at the girl and tilted his head slightly. Are you okay? Roma slightly shook her head, looking at him with a mix of frustrated anger and awe-inspired sadness. Then she said, Am I okay? Who in their sane mind would be okay after seeing a monster the size of a tree? How exactly are we supposed to move with that? No, wait. Forget how. What is that thing to begin with? Each of her screams ended with a punctuating throw of her hand at the beast. Northern glanced at the beast of burden and blinked. Oh, don't worry about that. He snapped his finger, using it as a sign command for the beast. The beast of burden shrank, its massive frame rippling and folding inward like a collapsing mirage. Its towering, stony back compressed, muscles coiling and condensing, until it stood no taller than Northern's shoulder. The chains adorning its body clinked together like wind chimes, their once heavy presence now draping over the creature like loose jewelry. Roma's breath hitched as she staggered back, her hands twitching with half-formed thoughts, uncertainty scrawled all over her face. You just, she stammered, her voice teetering between panic and fascination. You just made that thing smaller. Like, it was nothing. Northern tilted his head slightly, expression unreadable. Because it was nothing, he replied, as if that explained everything. Roma let out a half-laugh, half-scoff, running a hand down her face. You're impossible. He merely shrugged. Then, as if it had been waiting for its cue, the beast of burden stomped forward, its reduced form still carrying the raw weight of something ancient and indomitable. Despite its smaller size, the air remained thick with its presence, pressing down on the environment like a silent decree. We'll load the cargo onto its back, Northern continued, gesturing toward the supplies. With this, we won't have to waste energy dragging everything manually. Roma squinted at him, skepticism warring with a dawning realization. He is amazing. Although she still felt disappointed at the mentality he carried, that did not dilute the fact that he was a sage, an extremely powerful and influential existence in the world of drifters. What was such a person doing here with mercenaries traveling with her? She froze for a moment, reflecting on their argument just a while ago. Her body shivered as she remembered everything she said. Eldek, I said all that. Northern watched her for a moment before moving toward the cargo, his fingers curling slightly as he manipulated his strength. With practiced ease, he lifted the heaviest of the containers, positioning it atop the beast's sturdy back. The metallic shackles binding the creature rattled as it adjusted to the weight, but it did not resist. He's not going to want to sniff away my life before I even get the chance to realize it, right? Her lips pressed together into a thin line. She swallowed and exhaled before turning back toward the scattered corpses. Her earlier task was unfinished, and even now, the wind carried the faint echoes of her whispered prayers. Roma finished her murmured rites, standing over a particularly mangled body farther than the others. Northern did not pry. Instead, he continued securing their supplies, weaving the straps and bindings with efficient, methodical movements. The rhythmic clinking of chains and shifting of cargo filled the silence, an odd harmony in a place littered with death. Minutes passed before Roma finally turned back to him. Her expression had settled into something unreadable, though her fingers twitched at her sides. What's next? She asked, voice quieter than before. Northern finished the last strap, tightening it with a sharp pull. Then he dusted his hands off and met her gaze. We move. Roma studied him for a second longer before nodding. Without another word, she hoisted herself up onto the beast's back, settling atop one of the containers. The creature did not react, merely stood there, still as a mountain. Northern climbed up as well, positioning himself at the front. His fingers brushed against the creature's hardened hide, a silent command passing between them. The beast of burden obeyed. With a slow, earth-rumbling motion, it began to walk. The forest seemed to pull back around them, trees parting in the wake of the monstrous steed. The air hung thick with the scent of damp earth and lingering blood, but Northern kept his gaze forward. A slight frown tugged at the edges of his brows as they pushed forward. He could already sense it. Those darned abominations were already pouring in from all directions. It was a given. Even with the minimized size of the beast of burden, their movement was still large and elaborate, easily demanding the savage attention of the field monsters. Noticing his facial expression, she lingered for a bit before asking, "What is wrong?" Northern squinted his face a bit. "Nothing really concerning. Just hold steady. This will be over before you know it." "Huh?" Before she could say anything else, Northern jumped away. Chapter 764. Childhood. Some time later, Northern landed gracefully on the beast of burden. Just as he had said, it hadn't taken long. The monsters closing in on them had vanished completely, their savage snarls and relentless pursuit brought to an abrupt and dreadful end. Yet, despite that, Northern still looked slightly bothered. Noticing, Roma thoughtfully debated whether to ask before finally speaking. "You don't look satisfied." Northern glanced at her, then sighed. "It's nothing. I'm just slightly worried about the monster that destroyed the caravan." Roma frowned. "I thought it was a group?" Northern lingered for a moment, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "No, it wasn't. The wounds were identical." Roma tilted her head. "That could mean several monsters had the same kind of weapon. Maybe you killed them just now." Northern was silent for a moment. She was close. Her reasoning was logical, but it was incorrect. His chaos eyes had seen everything. Even without trying, the intricate details of the wounds had been imprinted into his mind. Each cut was perfect, smooth, precise, consistent. If it had been a horde, there would have been a pattern, yes. But not this level of exactness. There was no variance. No slight imperfections that came from different hands striking at different angles. This had been the work of one. The caravan had encountered a singular force, a monster far beyond their capabilities. Northern blinked, his eyes turning resolute. "No, I'm sure about it. The bastard that killed them is ahead of us. We'll probably come across it soon." Roma swallowed, shifting her gaze forward. She didn't quite know how to feel. She was in the safe presence of a sage. That should have been comforting. But for some reason it wasn't. This wasn't like her. She hadn't grown to this point by riding on others' backs. Pulling her legs closer, she wrapped her arms around them, resting her chin on her knees as she stared ahead with a somber expression. The day star was slowly descending, its light fading. The cold crept in stronger now, intensified by the powerful strides of the beast beneath them. Northern glanced at her. "Where's your cloak?" She hesitated. "I used it to lay Garyon to rest." Northern tilted his head slightly. "Isn't that a useless thing to do? Garyon is dead. His body won't feel the cold, but you will. You need it more than he does." A faint, pale smile curved her lips. "Maybe you're right. But he looked like he needed it more than I would." Northern shook his head. Understanding the girl had proven to be a daunting task. Even now, when he was making a genuine effort. A cold silence drifted between them, stretching for a few seconds. Then, without a word, Northern summoned a black cloak and offered it to her. Roma blinked, retracting her head slightly. "What? I have no use for this, so you can have it." He paused. "Not permanently, though. I don't think ordinary humans can keep soulbound items forever. But as long as I'm around." "Yeah." Roma stared at him for a moment, a flicker of surprise in her eyes. Then, she reached out and accepted the cloak with a small, tender smile. "Thank you." Northern turned his gaze forward without another word. The cold wind howled through the air, almost as if it had noticed Roma had been reinforced. But now, wrapped in the strange warmth of the cloak, it became more bearable. She admired it for a second, her eyes glittering. Then her expression turned somber. A prolonged silence followed before her voice cut through, soft and steady. "So, Rian, you grew up in Verullania?" Northern thought for a moment, then shrugged. "Quite." Roma lowered her gaze slightly. She hesitated for a bit. Then carefully she asked, "So, how was your childhood?" Northern took a moment before responding. His gaze dimmed as he summoned memories of a distant past. "Nothing worth mentioning. My parents, especially my mom, were quite protective of me. I was only allowed to wander a few meters around the outskirts. I wasn't allowed to visit some neighbors because my mother thought they were sketchy. My dad would always tell her she was paranoid. He chuckled lightly. But he was just as bad. He'd stupidly forget important details, do things that made me question if he was really that old. Oddly enough, it felt like I was the adult in the family. He paused. Then, belatedly, he realized how much he had rambled. A faint flush of embarrassment crept up his face, but he quickly swallowed it, keeping his expression cool.
I'm sorry.
I lost myself for a minute. Roma smiled, watching him. Is this the first time? Northern raised a brow. First time for what? The first time you've talked about your family. Your mom and dad. Northern turned his gaze forward, silent for a few beats. I think so. Roma studied him, then asked softly, do you want to talk more about them? Northern hesitated. I don't think so. She smiled. Then, slowly, she turned her gaze toward him. And at some point her stare lingered. Northern felt it. Felt it long enough that it started to creep beneath his skin. He frowned. What? Roma tilted her head slightly. Then, she murmured, your eyes. Northern narrowed them slightly, struggling to comprehend her meaning. She added, your eyes. They sparkled when you talked about them. Her lips curved upward, her golden eyes gleaming. You should have seen it. It was beautiful. Northern stiffened. Before he could react, she continued, tell me you love your parents without saying, I love my parents. That's what that was. She smiled largely now, her pearly white teeth shining. Northern flushed again. But he suppressed it, keeping his face straight. After a second, his voice cut through the moment. Isn't that a given? Silence followed. Then, after some thought, for the sake of change, Northern spoke again. So, what about you?
Roma blinked.
Your childhood, he clarified. Where did you grow up? Roma turned to him, eyes slightly widening. For a moment, she just stared. Then, as if only just realizing he was talking to her, she pointed at herself. Me. Chapter 765. Overprotective Parents. Roma turned to him, her eyes widening slightly. She pointed to herself. Me. Northern nodded. Of course. You. She scrunched up her face, then threw her hands up. Why would a sage like you care? Northern sighed, a slight frown tugging at his brows. You've been making some ruthless assumptions just because I'm a sage. While it doesn't really bother me, it does tend to get disgusting.
Roma blinked.
I only asked because I'm curious, Northern continued, his gaze steady. How does a non-drifter like you fight monsters that well? She froze for a moment, taken aback. That was a compliment. A strange one. An indirect one. But coming from him, it was unexpected. And she hadn't realized how much she needed to hear it. Especially from a sage. Her eyes dropped for a moment, a pleasant smile lingering on her lips. Then softly she spoke. My childhood. I'd call it a grateful one. She paused, then let out a small chuckle. Contrary to my pathetic self, my brothers are all drifters. My eldest brother is a savant. My second and third brothers are masters. My third brother recently became a master. And my parents. Her voice softened. They're both sages. Northern's eyes widened slightly. That's not something I was expecting. Her entire family were drifters. She was the odd one out. But it explained a lot, her radiant weaponry, her skillful combat. She had either worked herself to the bone or had been drilled into it by them. Northern could imagine how overprotective they must have been. Especially if she was the only female. That means, you were the only girl. Roma chuckled, but something about it was sad. Yeah, the last one. She paused, gazing at the horizon. The beast of burden carried them forward with steady steps, the orange glow of the descending day star casting its light over her face. She took a breath. You know, a lot of ordinary humans are actually grateful they're not drifters. When they see the horrific things you guys go through, How many of you die every day? They feel lucky. Her fingers curled slightly around her cloak. But for me, it wasn't like that. I cursed my fate from a young age for not being one. Her voice wavered. The pain in her words was sharp, biting at the edges of her tongue. She almost gritted her teeth, but instead, she softened her gaze, her golden eyes carrying a strange mix of beauty and despondency. I wanted nothing but strength since the day I saw my father protect me from a horde of field monsters. Her lips pressed together. I wanted to awaken as a drifter. I was so hopeful. The entire family was sure I would awaken. For that reason, I trained harder than anyone. My brothers took turns pushing me to my limits, engraving everything they learned into my muscles. It was both enjoyable and excruciating. She swallowed. Then, 2 years ago, I didn't awaken. A heavy silence settled. Northern glanced at her. That must have been a crushing blow. My parents and siblings were fine with it. They saw it as a blessing. Her tone grew bitter. But I was desperate, so I started throwing myself into dangerous situations. I was young, stupid, reckless. They knew it too, so they got very protective of me. Too protective. Northern furrowed his brows slightly. He understood. Awakenings were often triggered by near-death experiences. His own had been no different. But deliberately seeking death? That was idiotic. At least she knew that now. Then suddenly his eyes widened. His expression darkened. Don't tell me. No. Roma cut him off sharply. I promise. This isn't me trying to throw myself into death's maw. Northern narrowed his eyes. Then why are you here? Roma looked away. Her voice was quieter when she spoke. The reasons are personal. I'll tell you. Just not now. Northern's eyes lingered on her for a few seconds before he sighed. Fine by me. Roma hesitated, then frowned. And I'm not trying to prove anything to anyone either. I just need to investigate something. She shook her head vigorously, as if trying to rid herself of lingering doubts. Either way, that's how I grew up, pampered and protected by 5 powerful drifters. Northern nodded. He hesitated for a moment. Then, after some thought, he said, You're lucky. Roma's expression immediately twisted into anger. What? Lucky? You call this luck? Please. She rolled her eyes, turning away sharply. Northern's voice continued. My mother never wanted me to become a drifter. They never trained me for it. I only had light sparring sessions with my dad. More as a hobby than anything. His fingers tightened slightly. When I became a drifter, I made the difficult decision to enroll in the academy against their wishes. They didn't stop me, but because of that decision I was sent to the Dark Continent. He scoffed. And because I was never properly trained, I paid for it. Dearly. Roma's frown and anger dissipated as soon as she heard his words. Northern's expression remained unreadable. Then, after a moment, Roma spoke, frowning as she did. I've heard of parents sheltering their kids, but isn't that all the more reason to at least put them through excessive lessons at public citadels? So they don't die. Northern chuckled lightly. Mine were unique. She chuckled too. Unique indeed. But then her expression softened. A light of pity flickered in her golden eyes. The experience must have been harrowing for you. Northern shrugged. It was. But I didn't die. He paused. Then, as if reconsidering. Actually, I almost died. Once.
Roma blinked.
Wait, really? Yeah. If the other students hadn't shown up in time, I wouldn't be here. Her brows furrowed. Then, oh, cool. I'm glad you made it. I mean, thanks to you I am riding on a 6-legged creature. Northern's pale smile faltered. Of all things to be thankful for, that is what she chooses? He shook his head. What a weird girl. And then, Northern suddenly froze. His entire body tensed, his eyes turning grim. Roma noticed and tilted her head slightly. What is it? Northern's gaze sharpened. Then, with cool indifference, he looked at her and said, I've found it. Chapter 766. Settling Scores. Both of them fell silent. Northern cast a rigid glare into the forest, his eyes betraying a hint of emotion. Something rose in his chest, strange feelings he couldn't comprehend. 1,000 questions raced through his mind in the span of a minute, questioning why these emotions stirred within him. Unable to find a satisfactory answer, he kept his gaze locked on the target ahead, staring with fierce intensity. Then he stood, stretching his arms. Roma glanced up as he spoke. "It's approaching, so I'll intercept while you continue forward. Don't worry about me. Just keep moving." She hesitated, looking down before speaking. Wouldn't it be better if I wait, so I don't go too far?" Northern's eyes lost focus for a fleeting moment before he shook his head. "No need. I can easily find you. Staying in one place might expose you to greater danger. You're vulnerable either way, but at least you won't have to stop if pursued. Besides, the beast of burden is quite durable." He waved with a smile before lifting his leg off the beast, allowing himself to fall. His body twisted midair before landing gracefully on his feet. After a quick survey of his surroundings, he began walking casually into the woods. Deep within the path he traveled, something dragged itself closer, an essence of brutality given physical form. Its body was an amalgamation of sinewy muscle and jagged scars, each groove across its flesh telling tales of battles fought and blood spilled. The armor it wore testified to its brutal existence. Patched together from corroded metal plates, remnants of shattered shields, and rusting chains that clattered like whispers of doom with each thunderous step. Its head, or rather the void where one should be, lay encased in an unyielding, featureless helm. Veins of darkness pulsed beneath the skin-like armor, feeding strength that seemed limitless. The creature wielded an enormous cleaver-like blade, a jagged slab of iron capable of cleaving through stone as easily as flesh, its surface gleaming with a lusterless, unholy light. The creature dragged itself forward, emanating a low snarl that resembled an ancient tree slowly splintering. "You have changed your name." Having glimpsed its form earlier, Northern had determined that Titan's reckoning would be the optimal strategy against this brutal monstrosity. He halted after walking for a while, staring ahead. The creature towered as tall as the nearby trees, pushing them aside, some snapping with mere brushes of its shoulders. Northern's eyes gleamed dangerously as the creature approached. A catastrophic maelstrom. Incredible. Field monsters truly were another species entirely. Shin had often told him, in his younger days, that they were more challenging than rift monsters, possessing limitless environmental features for adaptation. Features rifts sometimes lacked. The longer a monster persisted in the field, the more dangerous it became. Field monsters evolved in danger level more readily than their rift counterparts. Consequently, field monsters of hazardous or disastrous level were rare sights. Some forests had been designated red zones, entry prohibited, at least for mundane humans and low-rank drifters. Northern wasn't certain if this was one such area. The creature suddenly halted, drawing his attention. He dismissed his thoughts and focused on the beast 15 meters ahead. He summoned the lightning chain. A dull black chain wrapped around his right arm, while his left hand gripped a compact stiletto with a wickedly curved blade. Northern fixed the creature with a dirty glare. "We have some scores to settle." The monster, this catastrophic maelstrom, remained motionless, studying him. Its void-like helm revealed nothing as its body heaved with slow, deliberate breaths. The jagged cleaver tilted slightly, catching fragments of dim light as it exhaled a guttural snarl that seemed to shake the very air. Then the beast moved, not with the sluggish drag of something mindless, but with terrifying swiftness. The distance vanished in an instant, and Northern barely twisted away as the cleaver descended, carving a trench into the earth. The sheer force split the ground in a jagged scar, debris erupting in a violent burst as the air shuddered. Northern struck without hesitation. His arm flicked, and the lightning chain snapped forward like a hunting serpent. Crackling arcs surged through the air as the chain coiled around the monster's armored forearm. The electricity should have crippled it, should have seared through its flesh beneath the corroded metal, but the creature merely shuddered, acknowledging the pain yet choosing to ignore it. Northern's eyes narrowed. It's resistant. A low growl escaped his lips. His muscles tensed, and then a sharp, concentrated burst of electricity discharged from the chain, far more aggressive this time. The creature convulsed but barely staggered, moving through the pain as its other arm swung in a backhanded strike that nearly caught Northern's torso. Northern bent backwards at the last instant, feeling the wind's sheer force whip against his face. Before his feet fully planted themselves, he activated colossal force. Power surged through his veins, his body hardening, muscles coiling like steel cables. Strength beyond human limits burned within his limbs, distorting the very air around him. He launched forward. A crater formed beneath his feet as he sprang. His dagger, the fang of the woodkeeper, reversed in his grip. He targeted a gap in the creature's armor, where jagged plates failed to meet along its ribs. The dagger plunged deep. A soundless impact. Then, a screech. A terrible, bone-deep shriek shattered the forest stillness. Northern's instincts screamed for movement. He wrenched the dagger free as the creature exploded with force, its body flaring with dark essence. The backlash sent him skidding several meters, feet dragging through soil. He examined the blade in his hand, its edge glowing faintly. Hell's Guard had triggered. It works. Yet something felt ominously wrong about the creature. Northern wiped blood from his cheek. Its soul essence seems corrupted, unusual. He couldn't quite recall where he'd encountered something similar, at least not in this moment. The monster lunged forward with a powerful roar that shook the entire forest, causing snow-laden trees to shed their burdens. It raised its cleaver and hurled it forward. The jagged slab of iron spun through the air like a massive guillotine. Northern barely ducked, feeling its searing force tear past. The moment his feet touched ground, the creature closed the distance in one monstrous leap. It struck. Northern barely blocked, his arms straining as he caught the impact with the wrapped lightning chain. Even blessed with colossal force's insurmountable strength, his bones and body creaked under the attack's weight. His legs buckled. Ribs screamed. Body nearly caved. He had to redirect it. He twisted mid-impact, channeling the momentum rather than stopping it outright. The force dragged him across dirt, but that beat being split in half. Then he countered. His foot snapped upward, heel slamming into the monster's helm. His kick, amplified by Titan's Leap's leg strength. Northern paused, shocked. The impact made it stagger, not much but enough. Were they equally matched in strength? Northern hissed. No time to contemplate. He followed up in a blur, dagger flipping in his grip. He buried it deep into the joint between shoulder and torso. Another burst of burning energy. Hell's Guard ignited again. This time, the creature reeled back, a shriek of rage pouring from its void-like helm. Its massive hand lashed out. Northern dodged. He seized the lightning chain still looped around its arm and pulled. He snapped the chains backward with tremendous force. The monster flew helplessly toward him, turning nearby trees to splinters. Northern struck in rapid succession, launching a devastating kick into the creature's midsection. A thunderous shockwave resonated through the forest, sending trees reeling and clearing the area instantly. The massive monster staggered, clearly wounded. Black blood spurted from its helm. But it suddenly froze, then straightened. An ear-splitting shriek erupted from its helm, shattering the momentary silence. Chapter 767. Stupid Mistake. Northern clutched his ears, bending down with an agonizing cry as the creature's piercing shriek assaulted his senses. His thoughts twisted into a tangled mess, as if every strand had been grabbed and smashed together in a single instant. Damn it. What was it with monsters and their relentless assault on his ears? Blood trickled from his eardrums in dismissive streams. He wiped it away with a single finger, ignoring the rest. His expression darkened into a frown. I'll make you pay dearly for that, you stinking mound of rotten flesh. Barely a second after his last word, Northern launched forward, slicing through the distance, descending upon the massive maelstrom. The monster sensed him with ease, its hulking, rotten form shifting. Then, with a brutal swing, it brought its cleaver sword over its head with ferocious strength. Northern's eyes flicked to the incoming blade. He threw his hand into the air. Lightning chains erupted with a bright flare, wrapping around the cleaver sword, their crackling force slowing its momentum. At the same time, Northern adjusted midair with surgical precision, shifting seamlessly from his dive into a lateral flight. The cleaver ignored the force of the chains, tearing through the air where he had once been, splitting wind and space alike. Northern rolled in the air and came to a pause several meters ahead, his gaze drilling down on the creature with a sinister glare. The rotten mass of flesh, despite being eyeless, headless in a sense, tilted its void helm slightly, observing him. Then, it moved, grabbing a thick tree, wrenching it from the ground with monstrous power. With a circular motion, the monster hurled the tree into the sky. Northern effortlessly ascended, dodging the massive projectile. But before he could exhale, several more trees were already barreling toward him. They weren't difficult to dodge, just a matter of threading through them with precise maneuvers. The ones that came too fast? He shattered them with his smoking fist. The battlefield expanded. The once dense forest had been forcefully thinned, darkness diluted by the sudden openness. Yet neither of them cared. Each was wholly fixated on annihilating the other. Northern dodged another incoming tree, then suddenly vanished. He reappeared behind the monster. Before the creature could register his shift, Fong of the Woodkeeper bit deep into its rotten flesh, carving downward in a ruthless arc. A splurge of black ichor sprayed into the air. Northern was swift, decisive, his movements efficient and precise. He flew backward as the monster released a deep, guttural cry, staggering forward. The lightning chains cracked like demented whips, wrapping tightly around one of the creature's legs. The moment it stumbled, Northern took advantage of its chaotic movement and yanked, pulling its leg backward, causing the monstrosity to crash face first into the ground. Then, he descended upon it like a mountain of wrath. Fong of the Woodkeeper struck again, viciously carving into the creature's back. Not just that. Northern clenched his fist, raw power condensing into his knuckles, distorting the air around it. A slight shockwave trembled in its wake. Then he blasted his fist through the creature's back. Taking advantage of the immobilization, Northern bulldozed as many titanic punches as he could into the monstrosity's flesh. His eyes burned dangerously, blue light seeming to flare wickedly as each strike descended on the monster with a callous intensity. Northern, for some reason, felt his rage soar as he rained down boulders of blows on the creature. He continued, a thunderous sound rolling through the forest until the creature's body fell still, unmoving. Northern arched a brow. Although he did not hear the system announce it, the damned mound of rotten flesh was dead. The boon of having a second name, of evading Ul's judgment of his anomalous existence, was incredibly soothing. A wide grin spread across his face. He leapt from the corpse and hovered in the air for a moment, staring at the decayed mass of flesh. Then he took off. He froze mid-air, suspended in the cold winds of the sky, carefully scanning the distance. His splintered eyes found what he was looking for in an instant. His brows twitched. Huh? That's strange. The beast of burden wasn't moving. Grimacing, Northern blasted through the air, tearing across the sky, arriving at Roma's position in half a dozen seconds. He landed as lightly as a leaf on the massive mount and peered down. Roma wasn't on the beast. Instead, she stood on the ground, speaking with a small group of people. She had just finished conversing with them and was now helping them climb aboard. Northern's frown deepened. What is the hell is this reckless insect doing? Roma noticed him and waved, her voice sharp with authority. How about you lend a hand instead of just sitting there staring? The woman at the forefront of the group, one of the 5 struggling to climb, had a large stomach. No, beyond large. She's pregnant. There was no mistaking it. The strain on her face, the way she pulled herself up the mount. It was clear as day. She reached the top without assistance and bowed her head slightly. "The young lady said you are more than happy to help us," she said softly. "She also mentioned that you are a sage, and we have nothing to fear." Northern stared at her, his expression bleak. Not entirely sure what the hell was going on. More people were climbing the beast of burden now. The mount was broad enough to seat at least 20 without anyone worrying about falling. In its full capacity, could easily fit 500, perhaps more if space was managed well. A frail voice suddenly cut in. "Young man, Tatch sent you. We were sure only death awaited our poor fates until seconds ago." An elderly man stepped forward, clasping his cold hands together, almost too cold, nearly unsettling. He held Northern's hands tightly, shaking them with a smile that wrinkled his entire face. "Thank you so much." The other 3 humans bowed, their expressions softened with relief and gratitude. Northern, however, only stared. A creeping sense of regret settled in his gut, wondering if he had made a very, very stupid mistake in deciding to follow Roma on this journey to the blockade. Chapter 768. Rewards. The journey to the blockade continued in silence. Much later, after they had boarded the beast of burden, Northern became aware of the traveler's condition. A horde of monsters had attacked the nearest town to the southwest, forcing many to flee for their lives. However, countless others had fallen victim to the ravenous maws of the creatures lurking in the thick forest. Those who had survived owed their lives to hundreds of lost lives and 3 drifters. Among the group, only the old man and the pregnant woman were ordinary humans. The other 3 bore bleak, sullen expressions, their eyes heavy with the weight of loss, pressing a suffocating tension onto the atmosphere. At first, Northern didn't care. He truly didn't. But as the journey dragged on and he observed how disconnected they were, each person withdrawn despite sharing the same beast of burden, he found himself pondering the weight of hundreds of lives. He had never allowed himself to feel responsible for the lives of others. When they died, their deaths did not burden him. Except for one. One death had sent him spiraling into the depths of the infective madness of the red mine. It had struck him deeply, though he had lunged forward, though he had moved on, this one wound remained. A scar he counted. The first, the only meaningful one. The rest of the events in the Dark Continent? He had remained distant, unconcerned with anyone or anything beyond survival. The people he had killed in Sloria? Regretful, but they would have done the same to him. Death had never weighed on him. Until Garion. Just as that monster had once shielded him, Garion had too. That was a weight he carried. But could it compare to the burden of hundreds of lives? He wasn't sure. Northern sighed and closed his eyes. Something else required his attention. His consciousness dove inward, and when his eyes opened again, he found himself in another place. A familiar room. The scent of the city and snow mixed with the rich fragrance of his luxurious enclave. He sat still for a few moments, replaying the day's contest in his mind. The most useful person in the contest had been Aster. Northern regretted not witnessing it firsthand. But for the first time, the chatterbox had proven his worth beyond his endless boasting. On the fly, Aster had taken scraps of metal and meticulously crafted what he called a thruster. A mechanical device that embedded a flat slab of metal into reinforced alloy walls. The key difference was that its thrust grew stronger with the amount of essence it consumed. Essence, when channeled by masters, could reinforce objects, starting with their own bodies and extending to mundane materials. Of course, the material's durability determined how much reinforcement it could withstand. A thin piece of metal, for example, could endure a slight infusion of essence, becoming strong enough to cleave through a tree, though not in a single clean slice. Too much reinforcement, however, and it would disintegrate. A thicker, sturdier metal rod could endure stronger reinforcement. Reinforcement itself varied depending on a drifter's assimilation and circulation style. One method might grant even a blunt weapon a razor-sharp edge. Another might turn the same object into an unyielding bludgeon. Everything depended on the principles of their essence manipulation. Of course, to Northern, all of this was meaningless. He used essence circulation but chaotically, letting it run through every fiber of his being without concern for methodology. He could probably reinforce objects if he tried, but the principles behind it, he had never bothered to learn. He had never needed to, until this afternoon. Aster had needed everyone's essence to reinforce the metal. The others had played their part, contributing as much as they could. They were close to victory, so close that Northern's absence from the process had almost been detrimental. A rare and unacceptable scenario for someone who had put so much effort into bringing things to fruition through sheer will, a lone wolf to the core. But then their essence ran out. Aster, already occupied controlling the machinery, couldn't spare more. Simultaneously operating and reinforcing the mechanism was impossible for him. Not that he had much essence to begin with. Aster's talent allowed him to consume Northern's reserves, but his own supply was pitifully limited. So, for the first time, Northern humbled himself and learned how to reinforce metal. A slightly interesting bit of knowledge. Perhaps useful in the future. If he ever encountered an enemy like the rotten retainer again and colossal force alone wasn't enough, what would happen if he reinforced a body already empowered by colossal force? A shame he was only learning this after that brutal fight. Still, there were no losses. Tomorrow was another day. The duel would begin soon. After the contest, he had collected the duel placement slip, and the rewards for finishing first place had arrived. The team had received 3 items each, along with a massive sum, 10,000 orens. The items included 1 lordly great armor, a weapon, and a charm. The armor was a sleek, black ensemble, adorned with several straps and belts. It bore 3 orders. Stealth, rendering his steps soundless. Spatial silence, erasing movement disturbances in the air. Lightness, increasing his speed. The weapon, longshore, was a double-edged longsword. It carried a single order, yet it was a powerful one. At desperate times, the cleave of longshore will ignore distance. However, its length posed a challenge. Northern held the sword, feeling an odd imbalance in its weight. It was a difficult weapon to wield, but undeniably a beautiful one. Under the moonlight, it gleamed with a serene, silvery sheen, like a gentle yet merciless executioner. The charm was designed to enhance weapons, increasing their sharpness and durability. While it could be used with other items, it worked exceptionally well with blades. After inspecting his prizes, and indulging in a brief moment of fantasizing over the bag of orens in his hand, Northern left his clone. He would come back to finish the last part of the contest himself. Then he returned to the beast of burden. The final battle awaited. Before drifting into sleep, he summoned the moonlit scale. Chapter 769. The Shadow Drifter. The road ahead stretched endlessly. Throughout the night, the beast of burden pressed forward without stopping, while Northern slept upon its back. But even in sleep, his vigilance remained unbroken. He was always aware because his dreams were of reality. Nothing would slip past him. The other travelers also took moments of rest, though it was difficult to sleep on the trembling back of the massive beast. Eventually, exhaustion overtook them one by one. Even Roma, who had stubbornly forced herself to stay awake, watching for danger so she could rouse Northern at the first sign of trouble, succumbed to drowsiness. Though she resisted longer than the others, sleep found her as well. The night was bleak. Darkness clung to the lower ground of the forest, creeping through the nooks and crannies between ancient trees. Across the sky, a spectrum of bluish-violet light slowly pulsed, trailing further north, as if guiding their path. Its subtle glow shimmered across the edges of the forest, perhaps the very thing that kept the deeper darkness at bay, forcing it to slink into the shadows. No one cared. Every traveler was too burdened by their own thoughts, too shaken by the horrors they had endured, to give any attention to the eerily resplendent night around them. The journey remained quiet, until it didn't. Suddenly, one of the 3 drifters among them jolted awake. His eyes snapped open, slanted and deep black, like pools of ink absorbing the night itself. A gaze eerily connected to the shadows, as though he could see through the darkness that lurked around them. Like the others, his expression carried the vacant detachment of someone who had witnessed too much death. The weight of lost lives pressed upon him. But there was something else. A deeper, lingering darkness in his stare. Not necessarily evil, but profound. In fact, if anything, he seemed like a kind young man, barely in his early 20s. Yet his eyes, they stared into the void. His sudden movement did not go unnoticed. Roma, positioned at the front, turned sharply at the sound of his stirring. Her expression faltered slightly. "What? Is everything all right?" The man lingered in silence, his jaw tightening. Then, in a voice that rasped like the croaking of a frog, he muttered, "The horde is getting closer." Roma stiffened. Her eyes darted around their surroundings. She scanned carefully, searching for any sign of movement. But there was nothing. Frowning, she turned back to the drifter. "But I don't see anything." The man's brow furrowed, and he pressed his lips into a tight line. "That's the thing about them," he murmured. "You don't see them coming." He shifted, his gaze darkening. "I can sense them only because of my attribute, my affinity with shadows. They move with it, and at night they move faster." Roma shuddered. A slight, involuntary reaction. Confusion stirred within her. She wasn't sure if the man was speaking from genuine observation or paranoia. After everything they had been through, who could blame him? But if there was one thing she had learned, it was this: never doubt a drifter. So she chose to believe him. Her expression firmed with quiet resolve as she nodded. "Don't worry," she reassured him. "I told you, didn't I? We have a sage with us. There's nothing to be afraid of." The man's tense shoulders loosened slightly. The worry in his eyes remained, but it was subdued now. His gaze drifted to the figure resting leisurely beside the girl. The others who had woken from the conversation reacted the same way. The mere mention of a sage was enough to settle their anxious hearts. Yet, at the same time, a different emotion flickered across their faces. Confusion, doubt. Their eyes lingered on the young man, hesitant, uncertain. Could he really be a sage? He looked too young. Northern was tall, strikingly handsome, and carried himself with effortless confidence. If he told them he was 25, he could probably pass without question. But that was precisely the issue. Even 25 was too young for a sage. No one, absolutely no one, expected that the boy they were all looking to for protection was just 17 years old. But the girl had assured them. She had even told them that the powerful beast they rode upon belonged to him, that he had single-handedly subdued the monster. And it was hard to deny. Northern emanated a presence that was both pristine and domineering. His aura undeniable. Yet, they had been through too much. It was difficult not to doubt. Meanwhile, Roma shifted slightly, reaching out to tap Northern awake. Before she could, however, he stirred. His eyes opened, sharp and aware, as he smoothly propped himself up. Roma froze. For a moment, she was caught off guard, her brow arching in curiosity. Was that a coincidence? Or did you know? Northern remained silent. He didn't answer right away. Instead, his gaze shifted, moving past her, turning to the young man who had just alerted them. Profile. Name, Sheenspertier. True name, Shadow Drifter. Attributes, Eyes of the Shadows. Soul rank, Vagrant. Soul core saturation, Mid. Talent, Shadow malleability. Talent class, C. Talent ability, Shadow release, Shadow command, Dark blade. Now that's interesting. A faint smile tugged at the corners of Northern's lips, threatening to surface, only to fade before it could fully form. He had never encountered a shadow type or darkness type talent before. A talent with a name linked directly to the shadows. But it made sense. After all, there were talents for ice, fire, water, every elemental force imaginable. So why not shadows? For a moment he contemplated. Should he copy it? Tempting thought. But Northern had something far more important ahead, the blockade. Lithia was a city of merchants, a thriving hub of commerce. And where there were merchants, there were drifters, the kind that wealthy and influential traders hired from the citadel to safeguard their goods. Which meant there were bound to be stronger, sweeter talents waiting for him. A buffet of power. Delicious talents ripe for the taking. His hesitation deepened. This was his last slot, before he could move up to the next soul rank. A moment later, Northern exhaled softly. Then he blinked. And at the end of that blink, Chaos Eyes manifested. A subtle shift. An imperceptible change to most. But not to the young drifter who had sensed the horde. His entire body shuddered. A visible tremble crawled through his limbs as he instinctively tried to retreat, scrambling backward. Before he could, however, Northern stood up. Then, without a word, he leapt off the beast of burden. Chapter 770. The Shadow in Thrall, Part 1. Northern hovered in the air, arms folded, his gaze piercing the brooding darkness below. The cold winds clawed at his skin, but their scrapes were nothing more than whispers, harmless chills that even a child could endure. Any other person, of course, subjected to such cold, would likely shiver to death. His eyes, each one sharp and splintered, scanned the ground with meticulous precision. Northern's danger sense picked up nothing. His spatial awareness detected no anomalies. And yet, the shadow drifter had insisted something was wrong. He had to be right. After all, they had survived something. And they were running from something. Northern frowned slightly. What he didn't like, however, was that this something had now become his burden thanks to that strange, infuriating girl called Roma. Not that he was surprised. Perhaps because he had taken the first step toward understanding her. Or perhaps because, in a strange way, she amused him. A girl trying to protect others without a shred of power, relying solely on his strength and feeding it to the travelers like a warm meal of confidence. He shook his head, chuckling under his breath. She really is a shameless one. Returning his attention to the ground, Northern scrutinized the shadows. Natural, undisturbed. Even his chaos eyes revealed nothing. He almost considered returning to the beast of burden. But then he froze. He hated leaving questions unanswered. If there was something lurking beneath, he would find it. His body flashed downward, skimming the treetops as his vision coalesced, sharpening with absolute clarity. Even without a shadow-based talent, attribute, or ability, the night held no secrets from him. Darkness, shadows, it made no difference. His eyes could cut through them all, which was how he caught it. A subtle movement, barely a flicker. Northern halted abruptly, hovering just above a certain tree. His gaze locked onto the ground below. Narrowing his eyes, he studied it, and waited. Then he saw it again. This time, clearer than a fleeting glimpse. The shadows were moving. A dark, grim frown settled on his face. Like clouds of black mist, they crept forward, slithering beneath the dim radiance of the night sky. At first glance, the movement almost seemed natural, something ordinary eyes would dismiss as a trick of the light. But Northern did not have ordinary eyes. A drifter's experience taught one how to see, and more importantly, what to question. He had battled too many creatures, encountered too many horrors lurking within rifts, to mistake this for something mundane. Shadows did not move of their own accord. They saturated and receded in the presence of light. Even under the stark and muted glow of the colorful sky, they should have been creeping, yes, but not forward. Not following the path of the skylight. That was wrong. That was unnatural. Suspicion coiled in his gut. But he didn't rush. Instead, he lingered, his eyes narrowing and four pupils moving subtly as he decided to peer deeper into the ligatures of the shadows. But therein lay another problem. He didn't know what a shadow's ligatures were supposed to look like. Still, something shifted beneath his scrutiny. Faint, subtle, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably sentient. The shadows weren't just moving. They were alive. His suspicions solidified into certainty. Without hesitation, he activated soul sight. And then, he saw it. Monster profile. Name: Shadow Enthralls. True name, Vagrant of Shadows. Rank, Maelstrom. Danger level, Apex. Attributes, Shadow. Abilities, Shadow Sea, Dark Fear. Northern winced just slightly. His mind jolted back to the harrowing encounter with the first Apex Maelstrom he had faced. The Kirathon. The bastard had put him through hell. A relentless pursuer, a nightmare without end. Their last battle had nearly torn the ocean apart. But in the end, Northern had been the one to prevail. Now the Kirathon lay buried in his soul's cape, a monument to his triumph. A wicked smile stretched across his face. I should start a collection or something. With that thought, he leaped down from the tree, landing smoothly in a crouch before rising to his full height. A mad blue light flickered in his eyes. The illusioned hefter wove itself from his soul, manifesting into his grasp as he turned to face the creeping darkness. Now that he was closer, he could feel it. The malevolent thing was like a storm, but not a raging tempest. No, this one stalked. It moved deliberately, pacing through the woods, engulfing everything in its path with eerie patience. And then, changed. As it inched toward him, its form began to rise. The ink-black mass thickened, its towering shape devouring the trees, its edges bleeding into the night like a formless abyss swallowing all in its wake. Unnatural, ominous. Northern stood there, watching as the shifting veil of shadows swallowed the landscape, shifting forward with an unrelenting advance. His heartbeat, steady and controlled, suddenly pounded thunderously against his ribs. A strange sensation clawed at his chest. He couldn't quite place it, but it was terrifying. Northern froze. I'm scared. The thought almost startled him more than the entity itself. He was supposed to have mental resistance against things like this. His mind was supposed to be beyond the reach of fear. At least, I'm sane enough to know that I'm scared. But that did not make it any less bearable. His frown deepened. Each passing second, the darkness crept closer. And with it, the fear. It was growing, coiled around him, pressing down with an oppressive weight. The longer he stood there, the more he felt it. Thick, suffocating, inevitable. But something was off. The fear, it wasn't his. It was spreading, infecting the space around him like a disease. Northern had stood frozen in place before, caught in its silent grasp. But now his mind was alive again. Without hesitation, he shot backward, a single powerful leap widening the gap between him and the advancing shadows. How am I supposed to fight shadows? The question clawed at his mind, but no answer came. Shadows were intangible. Physical attacks would be useless against them. But standing there, frozen in thought, wasn't an option either. At least I have to try something. Northern gritted his teeth. He crouched low, pressing his palm against the ground. Let's see if it's trappable. From the point of contact, frost erupted, spreading like a rabid disease, consuming the dark landscape in a creeping white. The purplish ice surged outward, hungrily devouring everything in its wake. A thick wall shot skyward, encircling the shadows from all sides, sealing them within a frozen cage. For a brief moment, Northern exhaled. Then, his breath hitched, his face paled. The shadows, they didn't just ignore the ice. They absorbed it. Like ink spilling into water, the frost vanished into the shifting veil of darkness, devoured without resistance. Northern's fingers twitched slightly. It's eating it? A new layer of unease settled over him. Chapter 771. The Shadow in Thrall, Part 2. Northern stood still, his face pale and bleak. For the first time in a while, uncertainty gripped him. The shifting cloud of shadows had just confirmed a terrible truth. Physical attacks wouldn't work. And that fact bothered him. It wasn't just a setback. It was a challenge to his very existence. The idea that no matter how much effort he put into a physical attack, the outcome would remain the same, that he would never be able to overpower it through sheer force. Unacceptable. Is this the only kind of pride strong people can afford? The thought unsettled him for a moment. He wasn't one to oversell himself, but facts were facts. Among drifters, only a handful could match his strength. Most of them were paragons. And among those paragons, none could permanently wield more than one talent and its abilities. But he could. So if anyone had the right to pride, it was him. He hadn't just arrived at this point. He had crawled his way here. When he couldn't run, he walked. When he couldn't walk, he crawled. And when even crawling was impossible, he slithered, dragging himself through the dirt like a limbless mass of flesh, inching forward no matter what. He had never stopped moving. And that was why he was here. The Dark Continent, really a land of disaster, but because of that had been his crucible. A forge that had remade him. Though he didn't like everything he had become, and though he knew he still had room to grow, he was thankful. So let him have his pride. And let him be humbled by the terrifying experience of failure. Northern exhaled. His eyes slipped shut for a moment. His breath steadied. A slow inhale. A long, controlled exhale. Vapor curled from his nostrils like steaming mist. And then, the world ignited. A burning sun exploded into existence behind him, bursting out of thin air with an unforgiving radiance. The trees, tall, ancient, unwavering, stood no chance. They were incinerated in an instant. The entire landscape bathed in a golden glow. Searing heat scorched the ground, reducing it to nothing. The miniature day star loomed high above, casting its blazing presence over the forest like the backdrop of a dying horizon. Northern stood before it, his silhouette cut against the radiant fireball, his back glowing with celestial fury. And for the first time, the creeping shadows stopped. Their slithering tendrils recoiled, curling back in a sudden terrified retreat. It was like watching a monster shrink away from a flame that could eradicate its very soul. Northern glanced at the radiant sphere. He remembered the small sun halo he had once summoned in the dungeon. This was 100 times its size. Sun Nova was like a child of the true sun, plucked from the horizon and placed here, in the middle of the wrong world. An out-of-place scenery. A satisfied grin curled on Northern's lips as he turned to face the encroaching shadows. I said it. Only the strong can afford pride. His eyes burned with a wicked glint, their light radiating with the same intensity as the miniature sun behind him. And then, flames rained down. Like comets streaking through the sky, fireballs erupted from the sun nova, plunging into the swirling abyss. Northern watched as the darkness recoiled. His grin remained for a moment, then vanished. His brows twitched. No effect. The fireballs disappeared into the abyss, swallowed whole. Or maybe not swallowed. Lost. Lost in the tumultuous waves of shadows, flickering for an instant before vanishing into the inky depths. Northern couldn't tell if they were truly being consumed or if they simply ceased to exist upon entering. But what he did know was that it wasn't enough. The malevolent storm continued its slow advance. This time, however, its movements had changed. The slithering darkness no longer lunged forward. It crawled, measured, deliberate, like a predator wary of the flame but undeterred by it. Northern narrowed his eyes. Is it adapting? With a swift motion, he swung his hand forward. A torrent of fire cascaded down in a ceaseless barrage, crashing into the shadows with relentless force. But nothing changed. It was the same. Northern exhaled, brushing his fingers through his dark bangs, roughening them as he stared, speechless, at the slowly marching storm. This bastard! It was useless. No matter how much effort he put into a physical attack, it would always end the same way. This was not something he could defeat with brute strength. The very thing he had relied on to bulldoze his way through every adversary. He had always believed that everything could be broken with enough force. And yet, here he was, his arms folded, his eyes shut in frustration. As much as he hated to admit it, the Central Plains, no, maybe this entire damned continent was a crucible of its own. Not just because of the rifts, but because of the insidious monstrosities that lurked outside of it. Creatures that had grown and adapted to nature itself, rather than following the orthodoxy of rift-spawn beings. And there were many of them. Northern exhaled sharply. He was beginning to understand why being a drifter here was hell. His brows twitched, and with a frustrated growl, he ignited his eyes with a brilliant glow. Okay, damn it. I might have been a little full of myself a second ago. Maybe there are some things I can't solve by just being persistent. But then, his thoughts halted. His eyes narrowed. Something was moving. Beneath the crawling feet of the shadows. Not something. Many things. His pupils dilated. And then, they emerged. Hordes. Not just monsters.
Humans.
They burst from the darkness. Weapons clutched in their hands. Eyes gleaming with madness. And they were charging straight for him. All kinds of lights illuminated in their palms. The glow of talent abilities activating in rapid succession. Monsters snarled savagely, their guttural growls reverberating through the air as they tore across the distance with unnatural speed. There was no grace to their movements, only raw, rabid hunger. Northern frowned, slightly. His heart pounded, not in alarm, but with an out-of-place exhilaration. A rush, not out of fear, but out of excitement, as if his very existence had been waiting for something like this. His eyes flickered, scanning the battlefield. He had barely questioned where the humans had come from when the answer struck him like an afterthought. The shadows had consumed them, and in doing so, it had made them its own. What a peculiar ability! A brief thought surfaced in his mind, half curious, half amused. I don't suppose my flames will be coming back at me. And then, a deep, ominous glow flared within the depths of the shadows. Dark energy pulsed, parting the thick veil just slightly. Just enough for the burning comets he had launched earlier to come blazing back in a relentless storm. They burst forth in a dazzling onslaught. A myriad of fiery streaks cutting through the sky, each one flashing toward him with terrifying speed. Northern glanced up, paused, then let out a pale chuckle. Yeah, right. Damn. Chapter 772. The Shadow in Thrall, Part 3. No matter how calm he tried to feel about it, the situation was disastrous. And it was anything but funny. Northern's pale face tightened, the faint smile on his lips vanishing as comets of flame curled through the air, streaking downward in an unrelenting barrage. Then, impact. A massive tremor shook the entire forest. Explosions boomed in rapid succession, a terrifying golden glow igniting the battlefield as shockwaves tore through the air. The land was in ruins. Trees, obliterated. The snow, long burned away, reduced to nothing but vapor. Amidst the devastation, however, the thralls of the shadow storm still surged forward. They entered the billowing black clouds of soot, forming an opposing tempest against the creeping abyss. Their weapons lashed out like whips of terror, their abilities flashing with deadly intensity. Yet Northern, he stood in the midst of the disaster, as good as he had been a couple of seconds before. The bombardment of flames? This was exactly what the Void Force was meant for. To trap power in its endless vacuum and redirect it. But he wasn't going to use it. If he did, he'd only be feeding the Shadow Storm more weapons for it to turn against him. So he would deal with the thralls first, and stall for time. That thought barely settled in his mind when a massive figure hurtled toward him. A hulking human. His eyes nothing but pools of darkness, charged with reckless force. Northern sidestepped effortlessly, letting the drifter slip past him, and before the man could react, Northern swung. The illusioned hefter sliced through the air. An invisible arc, and the man's arm was severed. A clean cut. Northern suddenly frowned, his face twisting with darkness. Even though he had cut down the thrall who was clearly a drifter, he did not see any blood. The thrall didn't scream, didn't flinch. Instead, he stumbled forward, his face contorted with a ferocious, burning anger. Northern's eyes flickered. The others, they reflected the same madness and were closing in. One after another they lunged. A fierce torrent of fiendish horror, raining down on him with a barrage of weapons and abilities. For an imperceptible millisecond, Northern did not move, Only his 4 pupils did, each shooting in a different direction, tracking the thralls as they lunged at him from all sides. Some were faster than others, a chaotic mix of monsters and humans. Not that he cared. His expression remained cold, his eyes impassive to the disaster unfolding before him. Then, in a moment of sheer terror, he vanished. His form flickered between the rain of thralls like a wraith of death itself, leaving nothing but destruction in his wake. His movements were precise, clinical, each strike of the illusioned hefter carved through the possessed warriors as if they were made of paper. Limbs separated from bodies, weapons clattered to the ground. Yet still, they pressed on, mindless automatons driven by something far darker than mere bloodlust. Northern's expression hardened. As much as he entertained the idea of keeping himself occupied with these mindless vessels of shadow, he knew the real master was creeping forward. It was only a matter of time before it absorbed him into its depths. And then what? He wanted to leave, disengage, fly back, retreat. But what if the storm picked up its pace and began to chase? Would they even be able to outrun it? TCH. Northern clicked his tongue in frustration. He twisted as a thrall lunged from his left, wielding what appeared to be a crystalline sword pulsing with an unsettling violet light. The blade passed through the space where his neck had been a fraction of a second before. The illusioned hefter flashed. Once, twice, 3 times. The thrall collapsed, bisected in multiple places. But even as its pieces hit the ground, they continued to writhe, reaching for him, animated by that same dark force. Northern's eyes narrowed. The shadow storm wasn't just controlling these beings. It was using them as conduits. Each one was connected to it, drawing power from its endless void, becoming extensions of its will. Which meant, his lips pressed into a thin line as realization struck. Cutting them down wouldn't be enough. He needed to sever their connection to the storm itself. But how? The thought barely had time to form before the air around him shifted. The pressure grew heavy, suffocating. Breathing felt like drowning in tar. The remaining thralls had formed a circle around him. Their movements, once chaotic, were now synchronized. Mechanical. Their eyes, once filled with mindless rage, now gleamed with calculated purpose. The shadow storm was learning, adapting. The battlefield was no longer a wild frenzy of attacks. It had become a trap, a mechanical formation. The thralls were no longer fighting as individual warriors, but as pieces of a greater whole. Northern's grip on the illusioned hefter tightened imperceptibly. This bastard. What? You think I'm a delicious meal? Are you salivating at the thought of having me to yourself? Time wasn't just running out. It was working against him. Every second that passed gave the storm more data, more opportunities to analyze his movements, to understand his patterns, to find weaknesses. And now, the creeping bastard was closer than ever. He needed to end this, somehow. And maybe getting consumed was the correct answer. Northern looked at the encircling thralls, a trace of horror flickering across his face. I can't believe I'm about to let myself get swallowed by a monster. Northern paused, breathing softly as he examined them. The synchronized thralls mirrored his movement, albeit slowly. Then, they moved. A symphony of terrifying flashes converged into the circle in an instant. The battlefield bellowed and rolled, chaos surging as monsters and humans moved with an impossible coordination, all diving in, one delicious meal in their sights. Bastards! Northern gritted his teeth in annoyance. He vanished. Blink. Using the illusioned hefter's order ability to appear and disappear as many times as he pleased. He wove through the storm like an untouchable phantom, his invisible blade lashing out like a furious wind, whipping away heads in devastating arcs and curls. His right hand was a whirlwind of chaos, twisting and curling like a malicious serpent, relentless in its hunt. Nothing could be seen of his blade, only the aftermath. A terrible clangor rolled through the maelstrom, metal singing as body parts spilled like souvenirs from each swift, deadly voyage. Northern's eyes remained cold, calculating, unwavering. His focus was unshakable, stark, untouched by the carnage around him. And all the while, one compartment of his vision kept watch as the creeping shadows loomed ever closer, salivating. Come, come, come have this mouth-watering meal whole. Chapter 773, In the Belly of the Shadow. The first thing Northern noticed was silence. No winds, no screams, no sound of battle. The outside world, once shrouded in the cacophony of clashing steel and the guttural roars of monsters and men alike, had been swallowed, suffocated by walls of shadow. Northern slowly turned his head, his gaze sweeping across the scene with cautious scrutiny. The ground, if it could even be called that, was a vast reflective sea, its solid surface mirroring the endless abyss of swirling shadows. Mist coiled and drifted above it like sentient night, creeping with a slow, deliberate motion, as though it bore the weight of ancient knowledge. It was calm, almost too calm. The mist exuded an eldritch grace, an eerie stillness that felt less like stagnation and more like quiet sentience. It was the kind of silence that belonged to something that had endured eons, tempered by time itself, a shadowed existence untouched by mortal comprehension. But Northern was not fooled. This was no sacred body, no ancient relic to be revered. This was a monster, an apex maelstrom, a thing that had survived for the stars knew how long, consuming men and monsters alike, growing fat on the essence of those swallowed within its depths. Perhaps this is how it lures them in, he mused grimly. A silent, open calmness that promises sanctuary, a slow, insidious creep into the mind, wrapping around the soul like a whispering phantom before dragging its victims into the nothingness and taking over their soul. A shudder rippled through him. He scanned his surroundings again, but this time, his chaos eyes flared to life. The world shifted. Beyond the veiled surface, beyond the illusion of emptiness, the truth unraveled in fragments of runic ligatures. They were unlike anything he had encountered before, alien in their formation yet eerily familiar in their fundamental essence. Northern had seen soul ligatures countless times. He had peered into the very fabric of monster souls, their essence laid bare before him in the form of ancient runes deciphered by the system. The patterns, the alignments, subtle yet distinct, had become second nature to him. It was the same when he looked into the souls of drifters or even ordinary humans. Over time, he had learned to recognize the nuances, the disparities that made each ligature unique. And that was why, in this moment, he knew this wasn't merely the belly of the shadow storm. This was its soul. And maybe, just maybe, the shadow storm had never possessed a physical body to begin with. A slow, uneasy breath escaped him. A mass of soul with no flesh to bind it? Or have the bodies of the devoured become its vessel? The uncanny coordination it had displayed earlier suddenly made sense. So did its ferocious desperation to swallow him whole. Surely, a being like Northern would make for a fitting vessel. A shiver crawled up his spine at the thought. The idea of being consumed. His body controlled by something monstrous. His soul bound in servitude to a formless wraith was sickening. Not happening. He exhaled slowly, shifting his grip on the hilt of the illusioned hefter, its handle wrapped in a strip of dirty white tunic. His mundane eyes, radiating an eerie blue luminescence, narrowed as he glared forward. He stepped forward, silent. Then, just before his foot met the surface, he abruptly retracted, backstepping as a figure lunged out of the mist before him, its elongated shadow claws raking through the space he had occupied just a second prior. A heartbeat, a breath. Then Northern surged forward. Grace defined his every movement, swift, curt, precise, never erratic. His blade came down in a silent arc, severing the creature's hand clean off, only for it to dissolve into a swirl of dark vapor before reforming, as if his attack had never landed. The entity turned, featureless. No expression, no emotion. Nothing but an empty shadow wearing the form of a man. It lunged again, a blade of shadow materializing in its grip, slashing toward him in an unrelenting assault. Northern's frown deepened. He leaped back, the weapon slicing cleanly through the space he had just abandoned. A thought crossed his mind. I miss Soul Taker. That immolated blade had been the only weapon in his possession capable of dealing soul damage. Every other item, every other tool, nothing was suited for this. He exhaled, a wistful glint in his eyes. Right now, he had no means of truly hurting them. Only dodging. The realization grated on his nerves. So what? Am I just supposed to keep running? The thought soured in his mind. The idea of retreating, of evading without fighting back, felt almost unnatural. But perhaps some battles were meant to be fled from, rather than charged into. Northern stood still for a second. Then he scoffed. Yeah, no chance. That was a mad lie I just told myself. The figures multiplied. One after another, they peeled themselves from the mist, growing more numerous, more relentless. Each shadowy wraith emerged wherever he stood, as if drawn to his presence. Every movement he made was met with a response, an attack delivered with a seamless, fluid lethality. And yet, despite their aggression, their movements held a strange tranquility. Fierce yet calm. It was easy to dodge them. Shadow Step and Blink made sure of that. The sheer density of the mist made the Shadow Step effortless, allowing him to slip through the mist as easily as he would through mundane shadows. And in that ease, a realization settled in his mind. The Shadow Enthrall was not simply a monster of shadow. It was a shadow. If it were anything less, anything other than a true shadow being, using its essence as a medium of transport should have been impossible. But it wasn't. It worked flawlessly. That discovery changed nothing. The bastard still refused to die. As Northern weaved through the ceaseless assault, dodging, sidestepping, vanishing and reappearing, his mind kept racing. Think. Actually, a single notion had been lingering in his mind all this time. A solution, a risk. No, not that. Let's not do that now. He clenched his jaw, suppressing the thought, forcing it down. It was dangerous, too unpredictable. He had been suppressing the thought, pushing it aside, telling himself there had to be another way. He kept pushing forward, weaving through the relentless tide of wraiths, dodging, shadow-stepping, evading with every ounce of precision he had. But he knew, sooner or later it wouldn't be enough. The shadows were learning. Their numbers were growing. Their strikes were closing in, adapting to his every move. And when the moment came, when slipping past them became impossible, he would have no choice. Because what he was dreading, the very thing he was resisting, the Shadow Enthrall would force upon him eventually. It was only a matter of time. The wraiths were closing in, their movements tightening like a web, an inescapable snare. Every moment he delayed, every second he hesitated, only served to make his inevitable capture more certain. So it came down to a decision. Submit now willingly, on his terms, or be taken by force when there was no choice left. Chapter 774. Soul Battle, Part 1. Northern Side. Still, the thought of letting that bastard in without knowing if it would even work. It's a gamble. If I'm wrong, I might lose my soul to it. But what were the chances that he was wrong? Void was the origination of all things. In a way, it was the explicit beginning. Even chaos was born from it, at least to some degree. His understanding of these concepts was fragmented. He couldn't definitively say this or that, not yet. But he was willing to bet a safe bet that the void within him would destroy the Shadow Enthrall, or at least scare the crap out of it. However, what if the Shadow Enthrall was ancient enough, powerful enough, to seize control of his body without disturbing the void? What if it could coexist with it? Northern shook his head, chasing the thoughts away. The deeper I think about it, the more I overthink it. I could be right, but I could just as easily be wrong. Regardless, the only path forward seemed clear now. A battle of souls. Northern's gaze swept across the endless swarm of shadow wraiths surrounding him. It was like a city of millions, all forming a closing circle around a single man. And they never stopped charging. He vanished only to reappear elsewhere. Again and again, shifting from one corner of the abyss to the next. But the result was always the same. There was no escape. So he did the only thing left to do. He surrendered. Northern exhaled slowly, casting one last look at the wraiths before him. Then he stilled. It took everything in him not to move, not to react on instinct. But he froze, suppressing every impulse to evade. And then, the shadow weapons and claws fell upon him. The moment the first shadow so much as brushed the tip of his subtly flowing hair, a surge erupted. Every single shadow, every wraith, the entire mass of the mist, all of it flushed into his body with frightening intensity, poured into him not just through one entry, but through every single opening in his head. Eyes, nose, mouth, ears. It was like drowning in darkness. Northern's body froze. Even though he tried to move, tried to command his limbs, they did not respond. For the first time, he felt something else in control. A foreign presence. A force that had invaded the very foundation of his being. And with it, the slow, insidious creep of fear. That whisper of doubt. That terrifying realization. I might actually lose my body. The thought barely had time to root itself before he ripped it away and stilled his mind. This was supposed to be a soul battle. Many drifters could barely comprehend their own souls, much less access them with clarity. But Northern was not many drifters. He was different. Where the shadow enthrall was running to, he would be waiting for it. And so, he dove into the limitless void, into his soulscape. Northern's vision shifted as easily as breathing, as effortlessly as blinking. And just like that, the familiar scenery of the Void Palace unfolded before his eyes. There he sat, perched upon the white throne, its surface smooth and unyielding, less like something carved and more like an entire slab of celestial metal, untouched, unbroken. He exhaled, relief settling into his bones. Leaning back, he let himself breathe, just for a moment. Then, the sky of the limitless void shuddered. Quake not of sound, but of presence. The limitless void had no uniform sky. It was a compartment of different skies, shaped by the properties of every rift he had absorbed. Yet, for the first time, it was unified. The workers, souls of monsters and that of some humans, paused in their endless labor across the vast plains of the limitless void. Every single one of them lifted their heads, their spectral forms frozen, staring up. And there, above them, a colossal darkness spread across the sky. Thick, endless, all-consuming. A night darker than any night. A sight that had never before been seen in this place. The bastard is here. Northern exhaled. A sharp, amused breath. The shadow enthrall had attempted entry first. Yet he had beaten it here. He arrived before it. And somehow the odds no longer seemed quite so grim. His confidence rose, not just a spark, but a steady, growing inferno. With a relaxed ease, Northern leaned back into the throne, resting his weight on one hand. Before him, darkish blue flames flickered and danced, their eerie glow casting shifting shadows across his face. The hall of endless titanic pillars was bathed in azure radiance. Ornamental stars shimmered faintly, woven into the very fabric of the palace, their gentle glow adding an air of subtle majesty to the scene. The shadows looming across the sky rippled with a thunderous roll, a deep, reverberating pulse that sent tremors across the void palace. For a fleeting moment, they paused, suspended in an eerie stillness. Then, they surged. A tide of darkness descended, flowing into the palace, cascading through the towering windows that glowed with an unyielding blue radiance. Like a relentless storm, the shadow enthrall poured into the heart of the void palace, consuming it in an instantaneous night. The atmosphere shifted. The entire palace darkened, its mystic glow suffocated, swallowed by the invading presence. And with it, the monster's dignity manifested. Northern's frown deepened, a dark, sinister frown. He had always known that apex monsters were cheats, an unnatural force that bent the balance of both monsters and rifts alike. But now he realized he had terribly underestimated them. This was the third apex he had encountered, and none of them had been relatively easy to face. In fact, the apex Belial had been the easiest of them all, and somehow that thought alone felt so wrong. But there was no time to linger on that. Not when the sky of shadows had begun to materialize before his very eyes. Northern remained unmoved. His expression hardened, that ferocious frown never breaking, locked in place like an unyielding decree. A majestic glow of power emanated from his eyes, not just of power, but the authority of power itself. And he waited. He watched as the shadow enthrall became vulnerable. This was it. The moment he had been waiting for. The moment the bastard would finally reveal its true body. Chapter 775. Don't be deceived by faces. The beast of burden rolled forward, its massive form pushing through the dense terrain without stopping for even a moment. The speed had increased, though only slightly. After all, there was a limit to how fast a creature of its sheer magnitude could move. Even so, the fact that it could move this fast at all was a surprise. Roma sat near the front, perched on one of the crates, her body subtly swaying with the tremors caused by the beast's every step. Her gaze flickered backward, watching as a massive veil of darkness erupted from the heart of the forest. She had seen many things before, but this was not natural. At some point, during one of her stolen glances, a sudden miniature sun ignited within the shadows behind them, a burst of blazing light, swallowing a portion of the abyss for a fleeting instant. Roma's breath hitched. The beast of burden had already put considerable distance between them and the chaos behind. In fact, they were close to reaching the edge of the forest. Beyond that, they would be forced to traverse the open plains leading toward the ocean, a direct passage to the city of Lithia. There was a shortcut. They could attempt to cross the river, or they could take the safer route, circling around to Lithia, avoiding the risk of being swept away in the current. The river itself wasn't too far. It branched into two, splitting like veins through the land. The small hill of Lithia sat between those two branches, perched between where they diverged. One branch cut across the plains ahead. The other branch, wider and deeper, flowed beyond Lithia's borders, bleeding into the territory of the reclusive nation of Vorso. Roma's face paled. Her eyes remained locked on the chaos unfolding behind them. Flames, dozens of them, surged into the darkness, bright enough to illuminate the distant battle. And yet, nothing happened. Roma couldn't make out exactly what was going on, but the sheer magnitude of it, the earth-shaking tremors, the waves of energy spilling into their side of the forest, it was enough to terrify her. More than that, it made her feel powerless. I can't even understand what he's up against, and that terrifies me more than anything else. But no matter how much she hated to admit it, she had to accept the truth. He did not need her help. He did not need anyone's help. He never did. He was a sage after all. Roma gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus on the task ahead. But just then, a voice rolled forward, its tone low, grim, almost resigned. Your friend will lose. Roma's head snapped back, her frown deepening as she turned toward the shadow drifter. Tyr. What? Her voice was sharp. What did you just say? Tyr's gaze was dark, somber. Something waited behind his eyes. He suppressed the flicker of guilt that threatened to surface and spoke evenly. I know it best, because I have a relation to the shadows. He exhaled, the weight of his next words dragging the breath from his chest. That thing is dangerous. It was born from the shadows themselves. It moves, it devours, it consumes, and then it turns everything it swallows into a part of itself. He paused. Then his voice dropped to something almost haunted. You have no idea. We lost our entire town to that thing. Roma's expression darkened. Her frown twisted into something angry. Shut your trap. Her words were venom, the malice in her tone rippling through the air with subtle force. Yet her gaze never left the shadow drifter. Someone is out there right now, fighting with his life on the line just to protect yours. The least you could do is have some faith in him and pray to the stars that he'll prevail. And yet, here you are, spewing this garbage. Tyr shook his head, his expression cold, his voice sharper than steel as he scoffed. Pray to the stars? The same stars that were never once alive. His lips curled, a bitter smirk flashing across his face. I might as well pray to a damn tree. Roma's glare hardened. She studied him, the man who looked no older than his late 20s, whose face carried a certain softness, a kindness buried beneath rough edges. But his words were ruthless. Her father's voice echoed in the back of her mind. Don't be deceived by faces. And yet, she knew better than to engage in a senseless argument over the modalities of a drifter. They were broken people, and their brokenness was in many ways justifiable. Most of them had lived their entire lives skirting the edge of death, surviving its crude claws by nothing more than sheer luck, escaping by the skin of their teeth. For them, every single moment was a grueling, agonizing, gruesome experience, and it had twisted them, warped them into what they were today. Men and women shaped by a perverse collection of beliefs, desensitized to the fragility of human life, rude, reclusive, and far too strange to be understood by the common man. And many other things she couldn't think of right now because she was, on the back of a beast, running from a storm of shadows that could very well consume them all. Suddenly, a wave of exhaustion settled into her limbs, a draining, consuming weariness. I did not envision my journey going this wrong at all. She too had a goal for being here, a reason, and that reason was no less important than the crates they carried, crates tied to a secret she wasn't exactly hiding, but neither was she mentioning. These crates and their destination, they were the very reason she had set foot on this path. She could have easily opened them, checked their contents, confirmed it all for herself and walked away, but she hated that idea. The mercenaries. She refused to let their loss be for nothing. So she would not stop. Not until she saw this through. Having a sage on her side was a great boon. But even if he hadn't been here, she still would have done it. A small, nearly non-existent scoff escaped her lips. And I would have died a long time ago. This is nothing like anything I've ever gotten myself into. Her mind raced. The sudden influx of monsters, was it tied to the blockade? What the hell was happening? And why was Lithia at the center of it all? The question gnawed at her. Disturbing, harrowing, and the fact that she had no answers was frustrating. Then, something shuddered. A deep, rumbling tremor rolled through the forest like an oncoming storm. Their heads turned, snapping back toward the shadows. And what they saw made their blood run cold. The shadows had disappeared. The once consuming darkness had vanished, sucked away as if it had never been there to begin with. The shadow drifter's face paled. His entire body froze. A tremor rippled through his cheeks, his expression stiff with something close to horror. Then, without hesitation, he whipped forward, his voice cracking into a shout at Roma. Tell this thing to run faster, or else we're dead. The shadow has taken over your friend's body. Chapter 776. Soul Battle, Part 2. From the very moment Northern realized that physical attacks were useless, he had begun to think of something else. A gamble, one he had wanted to avoid taking. But in essence, his belief was this: every monster had three essential components: body, soul core. The possibility of encountering a creature without a body was zero. It was impossible, an idea that had no place in the order of existential constructions he had spent so long studying. Through his frequent peering into ligatures, he had come to understand the fundamental threads that bound all things. And one of those truths was this: everything had a body, a soul, and a soul core. It was also why he had come to grasp just how much of an anomaly he was, and why Ul would want to exterminate him. But, unfortunately for the goddess, or whatever she was, she couldn't. Every human, every monster, every sentient or semi-sentient being that roamed the lands of Trael had a specific weave in their ligatures. A pattern and a fundamental link that tied three concepts together: the The soul core, the foundation, the anchor. The soul, a compound of consciousness, an intangible essence. The body, the manifestation, the vessel that housed it all. Each of these was a necessary existence for every creature, regardless of how they were birthed. So, he was certain that the shadow in thrall had a body. But here was the problem. What his studies of ligatures did not confirm was the rigidity of a body's characteristics, which meant, as far as a body was concerned, it wasn't bound by a fixed principle. At least not one that he knew of. But its existence? That was undeniable. The next problem after his certainty was finding the body. Was it the humans and monsters it had been spitting out? No, that was not possible. It didn't work that way. Each of those entities had their own weaves of ligatures, their own separate existences. The shadow in thrall could invade their souls and take over their bodies. But in order to even be recognized as an entity, it had to have a body of its own. If it didn't, then it was no different from a mundane shadow. Was its true body hidden somewhere within its soul? Because all he could see was a mass of soul, a consciousness that had been given the form of shadow, something that moved effortlessly, consuming everything in its path. And it was so easy for it to do so, because unless it encountered something that could inflict soul damage, which were rare to begin with, not even counting how rotten Northern's luck had been since the start of his journey into life, it was practically undefeatable. Worse yet, it had all the people lost in its abyss to control as its conduits. It was convenient, but then, everything changed when it met him. That was when the bastard began showing intelligence. The coordinated movements, the unspoken but painfully obvious desire to possess him, the effort it put into trying to claim him. It was desperate, and desperation more often than not bred vulnerability. And just maybe, that vulnerability would only be revealed when the monster was given the opportunity to actually take control of its body. That was why Northern saw the necessity of releasing his own body, and why, at the same time, he dreaded the idea of letting something that could seize control of his physical form enter his soulscape. He sat and watched, his gaze, cold and unwavering as the creature's smokiness began to compress. The shadows flowed inward, folding into themselves like a complicated weave of darkness. And then, he noticed it, a stretching, a hardening. The bastard was slowly taking shape. The shadows solidified, forging into something that looked like lusterless, blackened steel. That steel stretched endlessly, solidifying into 7 writhing, serpentine necks, each one extending long and sinuous, twitching, coiling, and at their ends, 7 vicious heads. Jagged spikes protruded behind them like a crown of uneven, twisted horns. And in their gaping eyes, a furious, distinguished pool of liquid darkness burned. Its legs, if they could even be called that, were like flowing darkness, constantly shifting, never truly taking a solid form. That part of it remained shapeless, giving the monstrosity an air of incompleteness. Yet, it was still massive, towering, lethal. A long, whip-like tail curled out from its enormous body, lashing violently against one of the titanic pillars. Crack! The entire column shattered into a cloud of debris and dust, obliterated into nothing but smithereens. Then, the 7-headed hydra of darkness turned its glare toward the young man sitting on the white throne, a cold figure beyond the eerily dancing flames. Then it screamed, a bellowing, sky-splitting screech, like 1,000 voices tearing through existence itself. Northern's hands flew to his ears, wincing. Arg! Why do all of you damn assholes always have to shout? He stood up in agitation, only to pause, then look away, his expression suddenly awkward. What am I doing? Talking to a monster? A long, pitiful sigh left his lips. Then he took his first step forward. Finally, the bastard had revealed its body, and judging by the way it stood, the way its burning, liquid eyes gleamed, it was absolutely certain that it would win. Certain that it would consume his soul and take over his body as its new vessel. Even without words, Northern could see it. The intense greed in its hungry, monstrous gaze. and somehow, it made him chuckle. I can understand why it would be so desperate. A small smirk twitched at the corner of his lips. I am very, appetizing. The thought made him stop, and then a second wave of embarrassment crashed into him. What the hell is suddenly wrong with me? He shook off the ridiculous thought, letting his amusement drain from his face. His expression hardened, a deep, stern gaze settling over his features. For a moment, the creature's 7 necks swayed, slow and deliberate. All 7 heads looking down at him from high above, watching. Stillness. A moment of silent acknowledgement between predator and prey. Then, they lunged. 7 heads. 7 monstrous, writhing shadows. They came down in rapid succession, jaws gaping, rows of diabolical black teeth aiming to chomp him apart. Then, the first impact cracked through the air, sending a ripple across the void. Then another, and another. The creature did not stop. It did not wait to see if Northern had been smashed to a bloody paste. It simply kept thrashing, kept slamming its massive heads against the same point over and over, determined to end him in a relentless, feral onslaught. Chapter 777. Soul Battle, Part 3. A terrible sound, like 1,000 hurricanes clashing against a tsunami, reverberated across the limitless void. The colossal pillars of the void palace groaned, shuddering under the strain of the tremors as the shadow enthrall continued its relentless assault. 7 heads blurred in a frenzy of battering darkness, obliterating the ground beneath with merciless abandon. A wraith of madness unleashed upon the battlefield. After seconds bled into minutes, the monstrous entity hesitated, not in exhaustion, but as if acknowledging the need for confirmation. Had the soul been fully subdued? A cloud of black dust choked the air, thick and impenetrable, swallowing the entire expanse that had borne the brunt of its rampage. Then, subtly, it began to shift, dispersing like ink diluted in water. From the vanishing obscurity he emerged, a boy with olive skin, smooth and lustrous, pristine as though he had just been unboxed. His unsettling azure gaze gleamed upward, impassive, carved from an emotion far beyond fear. His hands rested inside his pockets, a wicked grin dripping from his face. The shadow in Thrall's 7 heads recoiled, pooling back into the air. A moment of stillness. Then, a screech, a bone-rattling, ear-splitting howl of unholy resonance. All 7 mouths unhinged in unison, an omen of death. This time, however, Northern was not going to have it. His figure blurred, vanished, and then reappeared in the air, in a swift streak of motion. His muscles coiled, tightened, strained, and in the same breath, his fist whipped forward, cleaving through space itself. A punch. A single, devastating blow collided against the first head. A shockwave erupted outward, ripping through the air like a hurricane turned inside out. The first head flew backward, crashing against the second against the third against the fourth, and on until all 7 were sent spiraling, their screeching cacophony stifled in a perverse, almost satisfying rhythm. The shadow in Thrall reeled, staggering sideways. 7 heads dangled, swaying, momentarily lifeless. Then it froze. A brief second of hesitation, a sinister gleam flickering within its pools of darkness. Casually suspended in the air, Northern shrugged, hands still buried in his pockets. What? Don't be so shocked. His voice slithered through the air, lazy yet sharp. This is a soul battle. In here, both of us are subjected to the same manner of damage. It doesn't matter how the hit is made. We are beaten the same way. You win, you take over my soul. I win, you die. He paused, raising his chin before he continued. Brace yourself, bastard. I will beat nonsense and bastard into your body. His grin stretched wider, feral, merciless, absolute, as he shot toward the abomination once more. Within the soul, a physical attack was non-existent. No matter how physical their battle seemed, there was nothing physical about it. All of it was a direct confrontation on one soul, with the monster supposedly supposed to have the upper hand because of its semi-tangible body. With any other soul it would definitely have gotten the upper hand, but Northern was a bad match. The reason being the limitless void. The limitless void was an existence shaped and controlled alone by Northern's will. The potentiality of that very fact alone leaves many rooms for exploration of certain and unthinkable impossibilities. Northern and the shadow in thrall collided. A brutal clash of flesh and force, a storm of sheer devastation. The 7 serpentine heads struck with the might of boulders heavy enough to drown the sky, a relentless, chaotic onslaught. Each terrifying punch, each devastating blow was met by just 2 hands. Northern's arms whipped and flowed with imperceptible speed, a ceaseless blur intercepting every crushing strike. His fists crashed against the creature's metallic snouts, shattering the air with force equal to its own, an unrelenting tide of counterforce. Their exchange was a frenzy of blurred motion, a violent symphony of snapping necks and battering fists, all crackling through the battlefield with a thunderous roar trapped within a barrel of storm clouds. It was both breathtaking and terrifying. 2 short hands against 7 monstrous heads. Yet Northern never faltered. His expression remained unmoved, unbothered, even bored. His eyes never wavered, never flinched, locked onto his opponent with a gaze of absolute control. Then he sighed, a quiet, almost casual exhale right in the midst of the chaos. And in that very moment he broke the pattern. One hand withdrew, the other lunged, a sudden, jarring shift, diving upward in a perfect, chaotic arc. The execution was flawless and unpredictable, a mastery of discordance. The impact was imperceptible until it landed. An uppercut, so sudden, so devastating. It sent one head careening backward, reeling violently through the air, completely off course. In that single misdirection, Northern took control of the battle. The rhythm shifted, no longer a synchronized pattern of strikes and counters, but a disaster of disflow, the fight scattering into pure, uncontrolled chaos. And that was exactly his intention. Northern blurred forward, a streak of movement weaving through the air, each head snapping toward him with ruthless pursuit. But his body was already a step ahead, twisting, shifting, leading them further into their own destruction. Then he landed. His boots screeched across the polished, reflective floor of the void palace, friction hissing like a blade scraping against steel. With an effortless dusting of his hands, he smiled. There, the shadow in thrall, the abomination of darkness, was stilled. Its 7 serpentine necks, once wild and ferocious, were now twisted and entwined, tangled into an unsalvageable knot of mangled limbs. Breaking free was impossible. Northern studied the trapped creature, his grin shifting into a small nod of acknowledgement. Training with Byran did pay off. A sudden tremor quaked through the very air. The void palace shuddered. Not from the battle, but from something deeper, something far worse. The pleasant look on Northern's face faded, sinking into a river of stern caution. A silent chill rippled through the atmosphere. Then the air itself shivered. A crackling surge of darkness consumed the shadow in thrall, its form unraveling, dissolving into a mass of shifting, writhing shadows. And then it reassembled. But this time it was no longer the same. The beast reemerged, its form bigger, sharper, more monstrous. Its sheer size alone eclipsed the battlefield, 3 pairs of newly formed legs slamming into the ground with rigid, monstrous force. A pair of wings, massive, jagged, and terrifyingly vast, unfurled like a collapsing darkness, spanning over 100 meters. With a single swing, they crashed through the towering pillars, sending fractured debris plummeting like meteors. And its serpentine necks, thicker now, lined with coils of muscle as rigid as twisted cords of metal, shifted and flexed with newfound, unrestrained power. Northern's expression hardened, his face turning cold, wary. He shifted his stance, foot sliding back, muscles tightening, ready to charge. But something was wrong. Before he could react, before he could even see it, the monster moved, its head blurred, moving faster than its massive size should have allowed, a nightmarish blur of shadows and steel. And then pain. Unstoppable. Merciless. Real. A savage snap, and Northern's flesh tore open. The shadow enthralls brutal. Blackened maws ripped a chunk of his chest away, fangs shearing through muscle and sinew with terrifying ease. A shock wave of agony crashed through his body. Northern staggered forward, the world twisting around him. Blood. A river of crimson spilled from the gaping wound, soaking his body, cascading down his arm in heavy torrents. A thick droplet trailed from the corner of his mouth, his breaths ragged and shallow. He looked down, and for the first time horror flickered in his gaze. He staggered back, his mind racing, his body failing, his vision shaking. Before him, the shadow enthralled did not advance. It did not rush to finish the job. It only watched. Its massive form shifted slightly, moving with the grace of a supreme predator, its endless, abyssal eyes drinking in the sight of its wounded prey. And at that moment, the winner of this soul battle had been decided. Chapter 778. The Predator and the Prey. The battle was decided. The fate of the winner and that of the loser had been sealed from the very moment the fight began. No matter the effort, the struggle, the desperation, one of the two, a contender for this vast and delicious soul was bound for defeat. The result was inevitable. And what was that result? A grin split Northern's bloodied lips, jagged teeth stained with crimson. His expression twisted in ugly satisfaction. His body swayed, staggering backward, yet his voice drifted forward, carried by the hollow winds of the Void Palace. "What are you doing? Who have you been dancing with all this time?" A simple question. But something was wrong. The voice did not originate from the crumbling Northern. The shadow enthralled 7 necks shifted slightly, dismissing the sudden chill that laced the air. Yet, something gnawed at its senses, a crawling unease. Slowly it turned. Beyond the swirling flames, beyond the battlefield of ruin, there, a kingly figure sat upon a white throne, leaning casually against the right armrest, draped in an air of absolute dominion. Northern, the real one. His gaze smoldered, sharp, condescending, a predator toying with its prey. It was a bit entertaining, watching you make a fuss over a single clone. He scoffed. "So you defeated a clone? And you think you're king now?" His grin widened, teeth flashing wickedly. "Dream on." Leaning forward on the throne, his glowing eyes darkened, a flicker of malice burning in their depths. "How about you fight a few more of them?" The Void Palace trembled. All around the shadow enthrall, figures began to emerge, each identical to Northern, each grinning, each carrying the same unsettling air of confidence. Clones. Dozens. Hundreds. Thousands. Pooling together like a growing storm, encircling the abomination like a pack of wolves hunting an injured beast. Northern watched, his satisfaction evident, as the creature let out another deafening roar. But before it could finish, 7 clones shot forward with flawless synchronicity. 7 fists struck 7 heads. A devastating shockwave rippled outward, sending the monstrous abomination reeling back, all 7 heads whipping back violently at the same time. Then the real slaughter began. The clones swarmed, moving with ruthless precision, attacking in droves. The shadow enthrall roared, jerking violently, shaking its colossal form to cast them off. But it was useless. They climbed it like an unstoppable tide, relentless and unshaken. Each individual clone carried half the power of their master. Each one alone could potentially destroy the maelstrom. And yet, it was faced with thousands. The outcome was no longer in question. It was already over. All Northern had to do was watch. He sat upon his throne of dominion, watching as the onslaught unfolded. The clones climbed tirelessly, scaling the shadow in Thrall's monstrous form, their relentless blows hammering into its body without end. Some clawed at its steely flesh, skin peeling away, bones grinding against metal. Yet they did not stop. Every failure was followed by another, and another, and another. until a crack. A small fissure, spreading, branching, fracturing. Not in one place, but everywhere. The colossus of shadows was being submerged beneath their limitless numbers. No matter how violently the shadow enthrall thrashed, slamming its massive heads against the ground, against the pillars, against the very fabric of the void palace itself. It was futile. They only grew more persistent. Then, in one final act of desperation, the creature unfurled its wings. A desperate attempt to take flight. But it never left the ground. A single clone, particularly furious, leapt skyward, a twin-bladed staff in his hand, and with one clean, ruthless sweep severed the wing. The creature's balance shattered. It lurched mid-air, momentarily suspended in its failed ascent, before the weight of countless clones dragged it downward. It crashed, tumbling through the void palace, its enormous frame splintering the floor beneath it. The clones surged forward, tirelessly. They climbed, battered, crushed, turning the abomination into nothing more than a battered husk. And Northern, he continued to watch. His grin was dark, hungry, laced with the glee of absolute control. Of course, this was only possible here in the limitless void. Here, void essence was endless. His only limitation, stamina, meant nothing. It was tied to the physical body, and his soul was unbound. While he had been skeptical at first, reluctant because of the unpredictability of chaos and void, everything had gone exactly as he planned. And now, the creature's death was inevitable. More and more fissures erupted across its enormous form, leaking liquid darkness. Tried to resist, tried to thrash, to lash out, to shake them off, but its strength had waned. For every clone destroyed, two more emerged. For every moment it fought, its body crumbled further. The shadow in thrall let out one last, agonized snarl. Then, it dissolved into a mist of shifting shadows. Northern's grin widened. Of course, I knew you would do that. The void palace darkened at his command. The radiant glow faded, swallowed by an abyss of pure void, as every entry point sealed shut. The shadow in thrall was desperate, and its desperation gained a shape, a form, a swirling mass of shadows, compacted into a single, thick vortex of darkness. The shadow in thrall surged upward, a black storm of pure ferocity, blasting through the reinforced walls of the void palace with a force that shook the very foundation of the abyss. A final attempt, a last desperate effort to escape. It shot into the sky, ascending into the endless expanse of the limitless void, rising beyond Northern's reach before he could seal it within his soul. Not that he hadn't anticipated the move, not that he couldn't have stopped it, but he hesitated. Again, a strange, inexplicable discomfort coiled within him. Something about the shadow in thrall's presence inside his soul unsettled him. An unshakable discomfort gnawing at the edges of his mind. Taking the fight outside was better. With its weakened state, this time he would finish it. The creature soared higher, vanishing into the vast sky above the void palace, its dark mist dissipating as it fled into the abyss. Northern wasted no time. He tore free from his soul's cape, opening his eyes back to reality. His senses sharpened, his focus locked onto his target, already preparing to rain down an unrelenting flurry of attacks. But silence, stillness, nothing. Ha! His breath steadied and muscles remained tense, battle-ready. Yet, there was nothing. His gaze swept across the battlefield, his mind racing. And then, slowly, he turned his head. The shadow in thrall was gone. Chapter 779, Humans. As the beast of burden lumbered forward, its massive frame shifting with each ponderous step, the travelers trembled to their core. Their faces were ashen, drained of warmth, their haunted gazes dim and hollow, ghost lights flickering in the storm of fear. Roma felt just as terrified, but unlike the others, she locked the terror deep within her gut, a caged beast scratching at her ribs. Her eyes remained steadfast, a golden ember refusing to be snuffed out. Though faint flickers of fear could be seen if one dared to look deeper, she kept it all contained, the weight of control resting on her fragile shoulders. What the hell are you doing, young lady? Can't this thing move faster? The shout shattered the tense silence. A man, his voice raw and cracking mid-speech, finally broke under the weight of fear. He was bald, with strange, archaic tattoos winding across his head like the remnants of an ancient curse. The dim glow from the blood-stained sky cast eerie shadows upon them, illuminating their twisted design. Roma didn't care about any of that. Her chest heaved, her mind an unruly tempest, thoughts clashing like warring tides. The insistent shouts from the terrified travelers pressed against her skull like a vice, each word a hammer stroke against her cracking patience. She felt scattered, overwhelmed, cornered, and she loathed every second of it. Gritting her teeth, she let out a low, frustrated snarl. I am trying here, aren't I? This thing can only be controlled by the person who summoned it, which is the sage. The words tumbled out before she could stop them, and in the next instant, she froze. That's right, only Rian can control the mount. If the monster has truly taken over his body, wouldn't it be easier to command this beast to stop and bring us to it? Unless it isn't sentient enough for that. But I refuse to believe the monster possessing Rian's soul has no effect whatsoever on the creature he commands. A flicker of something fierce and resolute ignited in her golden gaze. She turned sharply, her expression steeled with quiet defiance, and addressed the others. Her voice, though calm, cut through the air like tempered steel. I reckon you all settle down and ease your minds. Rian is a sage, as I've told you. I've seen him in battle, and I can vouch for his strength. He will not lose. The third drifter, an older woman with a weathered face carved by years of hardship, snapped back through gritted teeth. How would you know? You don't even know what this monster is capable of. Roma studied the woman for a moment. She was the eldest of the drifters, her slight wrinkles whispering of decades survived. Yet her eyes, those quivering, terrified eyes, belonged to someone who had seen death and knew it too intimately. Drifters are supposed to be hardened by their experiences, but these ones, they look like frightened chickens. She didn't want to judge them. She despised doing that, because only they truly knew what they had witnessed. Whatever it was had shaken their souls like an apocalyptic storm, tearing through them with merciless claws. Her expression softened into a subtle frown as she responded. I might not know what the monster is capable of, but I know what my companion can do, and I'd rather wager on him than some unknown horror. A brief pause. She studied their uncertain faces, then shrugged. So how much are you putting in? I'll go all in. 1,000 orens. They gaped at her as if she had just spoken in tongues. A storm of shadows might very well be stalking them, ready to rise at any moment and swallow their souls whole. Or worse, it had already taken over their sage and was simply waiting to eviscerate them. And yet, this young lady was talking about betting. It was baffling, utterly absurd. The older woman hesitated, then asked with measured curiosity, Young lady, I'm sorry to question you. What rank are you? Revealing one's rank as a drifter was uncommon, especially for the weak. It was a sensitive question, one that could be refused. But in the woman's eyes, and in the gazes of the others, Roma saw it. A faint, desperate flicker of hope. And honestly, she wanted to preserve it, even if it meant lying. But lies? She despised lies. She would never. Roma shook her head, her golden sparks of defiance dancing in the dim light. I am not a drifter. A collective hush fell upon them. Their gazes turned to stone, shock etching itself into their frozen expressions. The pregnant woman's fading hope shattered like fragile glass, her head dipping as she stared at the floor. The shadow drifter snarled. What the hell? You're not even a drifter, and you've been acting like some kind of savior. Roma tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. But I was the one who saved you, although, literally. Silence. It was true. She had leaped down, stopped the beast, and helped them. She had become their tether to hope, their so-called savior. Still, the shadow drifter growled, his voice tensing with irritation. This and that are two different things, young lady. You might have saved us, But in the end, you're as useless as those two. We're the ones who have to fight and protect you lot. So take a back seat while we figure out how to make this thing move faster. Roma scowled. How about you shut up and let Rian handle this? Leave our fates in the hands of someone who might already be doomed? No, thank you. The shadow drifter rose, moving over the crates with measured steps. His calculating gaze traced the massive beast's form, pausing near its head, where Northern had rested. Roma's golden eyes narrowed. What are you doing? He ignored her, studying the creature's skin. There has to be some means of control. Tyr suddenly leaned forward, slamming his fist against the beast's skull. Faster, monster! Roma lunged forward, seizing his arm. Hey! What's your problem? The shadow drifter paused, his expression darkening. A common human like you wouldn't understand what survival means. Not that I expect you to. His eyes dimmed briefly. Then, like embers catching flame, a manic glint flashed across his face. He yanked his arm free, his voice rising into a snarl. Know your place, you little wench. The force of the yank sent Roma stumbling off balance. She slipped from the beast's back, and before anyone could react, a blur cut through the night. Northern rose into the air, Roma secured in his grip. His cold gaze swept across the travelers, his voice laced with disdain. This is why I hate humans. Chapter 780. Forgiveness. The travelers froze, their faces pale, as they watched the strange boy float effortlessly in the air. Northern's figure drifted upward, slow and deliberate, before he dropped the girl onto the mount's back. Then his gaze swept across the others. There was malice in his eyes, a deep, seething contempt that curled at the edges of his stare like a slow-burning fire. The moment those cold, dangerous eyes fell upon them, the travelers shuddered. A silent, primal fear gripped their chests, strangling their breath. Then, his attention snapped to the shadow drifter standing at the front. Northern's hoarse voice crawled out, thick with disgust. I am short of words, to be honest. Such rudeness and disregard for someone who put her life on the line to save your pathetic hides. He paused, his gaze sharpening into something deadly as he glared at the shadow drifter. He wanted to say more. The anger simmered within him, coiling like a serpent, poised to strike. But the more he tried to speak, the more words failed him. Because humans were fools. Whether it was handcrafted stupidity or something woven into the fabric of their very existence, he didn't care. What he did know, what he had experienced over and over again, was how foolish and ungrateful humans could be. It no longer shocked him. He had only hoped Roma would learn from this. Fragility was a sin. Naivety was a death sentence. Kindness? A liability. The cost of helping others was often too cruel, too unfair, and yet no one cared about fairness or cruelty. Humans were selfish. Humans were self-serving. They fought only for justice when it served their own interests. Northern clicked his tongue, irritation creeping beneath his skin. No! He frowned, a shadow passing over his face. I can't just let them be. His voice dropped, carrying a venomous edge. Get off. A tense, staggering silence followed. The travelers froze, their already pale faces turning bone white. The shadow drifter blinked, his mind refusing to process what he had just heard. Surely the sage wasn't serious. He couldn't possibly. All of you. Northern's voice cut through the stunned quiet, each word laced with ruthless finality. Get off my mount before I ask it to swallow you whole. Immediately, their faces crumbled. The old man, the pregnant woman, and the drifters fell to their knees, pressing their faces to the ground. Desperation clung to them like a suffocating mist as they clutched at Northern's legs, their voices raw with pleading. But Northern coldly shifted away. He did it with measured grace, not careless force, stepping back just enough to evade their grasp. His gaze remained fixed on them, cold and unyielding, cruelty burning in the depth of his eyes. Please, don't do this to us. We were foolish, please, forgive us. I beg you, sire, have mercy. Young lad, don't abandon us. It was Tyr. He's hot-blooded and reckless. Please, just overlook his stupidity. We've been through so much. We don't even know what we're doing anymore. Words spilled from their lips like shattered glass, cutting against their pride, slicing through the silence. And yet, Northern's expression remained impassive. Cold. Not a flicker of empathy crossed his face. Their cries, their desperation. All of it washed over him like an autumn breeze, inconsequential and fleeting. But then, Roma stepped forward. Her golden eyes held a flickering light, gentle, yet unwavering. Northern's brows tensed slightly. Don't tell me. Roma hesitated. She knew, of course she knew, that Northern wasn't acting out of cruelty. He was angry, disgusted, not for himself but for her, because of how they treated her. And yet, his approach was wrong. She took a breath and spoke, her voice soft yet firm. Forgiveness is an important part of our humanity. Northern's gaze hardened. Don't be stupid. His words struck like ice, sharp and cutting. Forgiveness? You would have fallen, possibly died, from how fragile your body is. And if no one was there to tend to you, they would have left you behind. I'm certain if the beast of burden hadn't stopped, they wouldn't have spared you a second glance. They would have kept moving forward and abandoned you without hesitation. And these are the people you want to forgive. Silence. Roma's breath hitched slightly. His words stung. And worse, she couldn't even deny them. For the first time in a long while, she was left speechless. Part of her wanted to rage, to scream at them, to give them exactly what they deserved. But what would that achieve? Nothing. At the end of the day, she would hate herself for it. She didn't want to be like them. She refused to let the actions of others dictate who she was. She would choose for herself. That was, after all, what her mother had taught her, to be a vessel of love and kindness, not because the world deserved it, but because she chose it. She wasn't doing this for them. Not for favors. Not for approval. Not for righteousness. She was doing this because it was who she was. Because in the end, she wanted to live with her choices, not be shackled by circumstances or the cruelty of others. And so, she met Northern's gaze, her resolve burning brighter than ever. Yes, Rian. Her voice carried no hesitation. I want to forgive them and continue this journey with them. Northern scowled, irritation flickering across his face as he shook his head. You're being unreasonable. His voice was clipped, laced with cold disbelief. Is this also what you define as passion? Roma paused, blinking at him. Then, she chuckled. For a brief second, her face radiated with a quiet, resplendent air, as if she had glimpsed something beyond his understanding. No, silly. Her voice was light yet firm. Passion isn't this. They're separate values. Her golden eyes flickered with something bright, resolute. But bring them together, and you'd have a being that is unbounded and purposeful. The disgust in Northern's eyes did not wane. He shook his head, the weight of his confusion settling heavily on his features. I don't understand you, or how you think. And he didn't wait for her response. Instead, he cast the travelers one last, cruel glance before turning away, making his way back to the edge of the beast's massive neck. As he settled onto a crate, the creature beneath them lurched forward once more, start into slow, unbothered march. Behind him, the travelers groveled, their voices breaking in hurried gratitude, spilling apologies at Roma's feet. But she barely heard them. Her eyes were fixed on Northern's back, the movement of his shoulders, the sharp edges of his presence. Her expression turned pensive. She wasn't sure why, but she couldn't stop thinking. If you want access to fast updates or the full novel in high-quality audio, contact me now and buy. I offer over 300 complete audiobooks from Pocket FM, Webnovel, Audible, and more. No locked episodes, no subscriptions, just one-time payment via PayPal or Ko-fi. Message me directly on Telegram or WhatsApp, or check out the full list of available novels on Discord. Start listening to your next favorite audiobook today.